Hello, 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 and welcome to Friendship Empire. I am the Empress, and on this episode, we are continuing our remembrance of Jocelyne Wildenstein, the Catwoman. This is part two. Our last stream was part one, where we read some obituaries and started to read some of the coverage of Jocelyne when she first hit the tabloid and mainstream media as a personality. Now, if you were here last time, then you probably know this, and if you were not, then let me catch you up on the subject of today's stream. And that would be this lady. This is indeed the same woman. 3 pictures of the same lady, Jocelyne, at roughly, let's say, the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, then into about the 90s, and then past the year 2000. This is closer to the date that we lost this lovely lady who we lost on New Year's Eve day of 2024. So, as you can see, if you're not familiar with Jocelyne, she was famous for her ever-changing face, and supposedly she was looking for a feline aesthetic for her facial features, and so that's how she got dubbed the Catwoman in the press. Or I should say, less kindly, she was also dubbed the Bride of Wildenstein. Not kind at all, but there you go. This is what happens when you get in the press. You get good press and you get bad press. And she certainly got a lot of both and seemed to enjoy, well, whatever she could get. But the thing that really, her face obviously caught everyone's attention. But the way that she got into the press was through her very, very tabloidy divorce, a very bitter divorce from her to-be ex-husband. At the point where we're in her story, she is still married but obtaining her divorce, because we have gone back to the 1990s in our, that's where we are today. And we are going to read an article. Let me pull that up. 1 second. And we're going to read this article. Now, we're going to read actually a few articles. We will leave Jocelyne's maybe original visage on the screen here to give us a little illustration, because there's a lot of text, a wall of text. The first article we're going to read is from 1998, and this is just a brief summary of some of the material that we covered in the previous stream, just a little summary. And then we are going to get into the meat of the stream, which is the very first Vanity Fair article, which was published in March 1998. Bitter Spoils. And here you can see yet another delightful photo of Jocelyne with a stuffed animal. Not that kind of, not a plushie, not a plush stuffed animal, but an actual taxidermied leopard, it looks like. And this was her ex-husband, or to-be ex-husband, at I believe the time of the publication of the article, Alec Wildenstein Sr. The movie of the week in the chat said, I think Bosch did a version of this triptych, meaning the 3 pictures of Jocelyne. Yes, well, it is artistic. It is something, and appropriate that you mention Bosch, because how the Wildenstein family that Jocelyne married into made their money was through dealing in art, and Alec was an art nepobaby, a French art nepobaby, and so, yeah, so we're going to look at first the People magazine article, a little summary, a little background, and catching up on what we went over on the first part of our remembrance of Jocelyne, the last stream. And then we're going to move into this Vanity Fair article, which digs a little bit deeper into the divorce and the family. And here we're really going to start getting into the art scandals, the fraud, the possible fraud, possible deceptive practices of various members of the Wildenstein family. And we're going to go even deeper into the art and financial problems that the males of the Wildenstein family had in future streams. But this is our first stream on Jocelyne. Was a little more salacious, I suppose, getting into a little bit more of the cheating that Alec did and the women. Now we're going to go into a different form of salaciousness, and now Hitler is going to enter the chat. We've got it was mentioned on the previous stream, but now we're going to get a little bit more into the art world dirt related to the Wildenstein family, but still Jocelyne is involved in this. So let's go and start reading this People magazine article, a good summary if you were not here for part 1 of the stream. So here we go. This is called, very cleverly, Surgical Strike, from People magazine, 26 January 1998. Cosmetically enhanced and proud of it, jet-setter Jocelyne Wildenstein wages a bitter divorce battle against her roving husband, Alec. Once the mistress of a lavish 5-story New York City townhouse, Jocelyne Wildenstein, currently embroiled in a nasty divorce from her husband, Alec, scion of a billionaire. Yes, indeed. Usually it's scion of a family, or a dynasty, not of an individual, but yes, has been banned by her spouse from most of the mansion. Since September, she has had access to only one servant. She used to have 7, a sitting room decorated with 10 Pierre Bonnard paintings valued at $100 million, a gourmet kitchen, a bedroom, and an indoor pool. And while she has the company of her 5 Italian greyhounds, but in a previous article on the first stream we did, we were actually told in the I think it was New York Magazine article, that she was only allowed to bring 2 or 3 of her greyhounds, which were a family. It was a mother and babies, and she was only allowed to bring a couple of them, which I thought was cruel to Jocelyne, and especially cruel to the dogs. Continuing the article, her capuchin monkey May Moon, which used to play in the floor-to-ceiling glass cage behind her tub. He swings while I take a bath, she says. Wait, is she referring to the monkey or to Alec? Okay, anyway, is stranded in Paris. The little primate doesn't get around much anymore now that he, the dogs, and Jocelyne herself have been denied access to the family jet. The pilot said, I am not at your disposal, otherwise I get fired, says Jocelyne, 52, in a thick French accent. Every day it is something. That's the way it has seemed anyway, much to the delight of the New York City press. The Wildensteins may not be household names, but the public breakup of their 19-year marriage has made them bizarrely riveting symbols of wretched excess. Jocelyne, who began life as the only child of a modest haberdasher in Lausanne, Switzerland, is asking Alec, 57, for $200,000 a month in temporary support, access to an array of family homes, and $50 million in escrow to ensure his compliance with whatever future settlement is reached. But what fascinates people is not those numbers. It's her face. It's her face. Indeed. Oh, and I can't get back to my article now. There we go. Okay. Where'd we go? It's her face. Oh dear, I've truly lost my place. Okay, the New York Post dubbed Jocelyne the Bride of Wildenstein, and New York Magazine called her the Lion Queen, a reference to, and that was the article that we read on the previous stream, the Lion Queen, a reference to her dramatically jutting cheekbones, studiously almond-shaped eyes, and tawny skin. Movie of the week in the chat says, ew on both counts. Alex and the money and the monkey. Yes. Yes, for both. Okay. Okay, back to the article. Jocelyne, judging from old photos, was remarkably attractive before she began a lengthy campaign of plastic surgery that Alec claims in New York was engineered to make her look like a cat. She won't say just how many times she has been under the knife. Not more or less than a normal woman, maybe more than a normal woman, but concedes, I did one facelift, and after that I did little things to not let the skin go, to keep it tight. If one day I need something else, I will do it, and I will not stop. Foreshadowing, boy, truer words were never said. She did not stop. Not indeed. For his part, Alec, a horse breeder, art dealer, and an heir to a $5 billion fortune, I don't even know how you can tally their fortune, actually. And when we get into the Vanity Fair article, you'll probably be able to figure out why it's almost impossible, I would say, to be able to figure out how much money the Wildenstein family has or had. So Alec may also be unwilling to stop certain behavior. Since last spring, he has been involved with other women, including a 21-year-old Russian model named Yelena Yarakova. Funny, she wasn't a model until he bought her a portfolio and got her signed to an agency, as we learned on the last stream. Still, Alec maintains that it's his wife's addiction to cosmetic work, performed by New York City plastic surgeon Richard Coburn, a longtime family friend, that was at least a partial cause for their breakup. Well, I suppose if you're getting as much plastic surgery as they are, you might as well be friends with your surgeon. Maybe you can get a friends and family discount or something like that. But it's also like palling up with your let's say, dealer, a dealer of substances. If you're buddying up with your dealer, I'd say you might have a problem. It might be convenient for you, but you might have a little bit of a problem there, or a big problem. I'd say a big problem. And then again, keep in mind that as we learned from an article on the previous stream, the Wildensteins had a family liposuctionist in addition to the family plastic surgeon. And they actually had more than one because on the last stream, one of the other plastic surgeons that they mentioned was the guy who pioneered the hair transplant and worked with Clinique, the Estee Lauder brand Clinique. He was the guy who apparently invented the Buff Puff, if you remember that name from a zillion years ago, a little like beauty sponge or something for your face. I think that's what it was, like a makeup sponge. They called it the Buff Puff. So there you go, little trivia about the Wildenstein's plastic surgeons. Continuing with the article. Okay, so she has the impression that you fix a face the way you fix a house, he says. I must say, I have trouble recognizing her up close. We can understand. Usually the quote that they repeat from Alec about Jocelyne is that she has the impression that you can fix a face or fix skin the way that you fix furniture. We saw that quote repeated again and again in the articles that we read on part 1, the last stream. So it's interesting to me that now he's mixed it up and said fix a house, unless he was misquoted. But perhaps Alec just decided to vary it up a bit. Continuing. Alec wants to destroy my spirit, says Jocelyne. He thinks if he says, she's a piece of plastic, everybody will hate me. In any case, Jocelyne notes, Alec is in no position to point a finger at anybody, having himself submitted to a facelift, an eyebrow lift, and several liposuctions. And what does Alec say to that? Pure nonsense. He has had only one eyelid lift. She's the one who wanted me to, says Alec. She thought my eyelids were not good. Once they only had eyelids for each other. Oh, clever. Alec first noticed Jocelyne Wildenstein on his family's 66,000-acre Kenyan ranch, Old Jogi, in 1977. Invited by a friend with business connections to the Wildensteins, Alec is the elder son of family patriarch Daniel, 80, and his first wife, Martine Kapferre, 77. Jocelyne, then 32, a licensed pilot and crack shot, spent her first day there hunting lions with the Marseille-born, New York City-educated Alec. The next day, he took her for a motorcycle ride. On the motorcycle, you have to hold on tight, she says. When we stopped at the top of the hill, we had the first quick kiss. After Jocelyne returned to Paris, where she lived with French filmmaker Sergio Gobi, I thought he was Italian, Sergio, Alec sent her a room full of white orchids. They soon reunited, and after their fourth date, he said, I know you will be my wife, she recalls. He didn't really propose. The next year, they wed in Las Vegas. And once again, I will repeat my public service announcement to all and sundry. A Las Vegas wedding is a bad omen for marital bliss in the future. I've seen it time and time and time again. If you're serious about your marriage, don't do it in Las Vegas. And if you want to elope, I believe West Virginia is available as well. Continuing with the article. The next year, they wed in Las Vegas and later moved into their Manhattan townhouse, where Jocelyne became accustomed to the ways of the notoriously secretive family. Investigative reporters believe that Daniel Wildenstein's father, Georges, though Jewish, added Nazi purloined works of art to his vast collection. Daniel refutes the charges, and we are going to hear much more about that in the articles we're going to read on this stream. They were a reclusive couple, says one longtime friend. They had a tight group of friends and were very quiet people. Instead of hobnobbing with New York society, Jocelyne oversaw the sprawling Old Jogi Ranch, apartments in Paris and Lausanne, a French chateau, and a Caribbean retreat. Alec supplied her with a Chanel wardrobe, including a one-of-a-kind $350,000 dress, a jewelry collection worth $10 million, and, of course, the surgery. And why don't we, just for a little visual, take a look here at, where is it? Over here, we have, this is Old Jogi, the Kenyan ranch. We've seen these pictures before on Stream 1. Look at that amazing geode on that fireplace. I'm just going to page through some photos of Old Jogi in Kenya. There's a pool, some rooms for, you can stay there. It's a resort. And the view, look how beautiful. And supposedly Jocelyne had a major hand in designing the resort. But I don't know. I can't say specifically if any of these were her design choices or if these are later to say, oh, and those are rhinos. Obviously not Jocelyne's design. And then this is the townhouse in Manhattan that they ended up selling. You can see that. And that they all shared, the family shared, Jocelyne and Alec and their children, along with his brother and his family. And then this is the French chateau that they reference in these articles. You can see this is a more modern day photograph in color, a bit obscured though by a wall that is in front of it. And then the older postcard photograph of the entire building from back in the day. I don't know what day, but the day. And then we did not see this on the last stream because none of the articles mentioned it, but we will be reading this article on a future stream, but right now we can just take a little look at the photographs of the British Virgin Islands estate that the Wildensteins owned and sold. And here apparently, sold. That's what it, or is it? Yes, being sold. So there you go. The beach. Take a look at the beach. Beautiful, typically Caribbean. The entry staircase, very dramatic. The gardenia room, nice, lovely. Another pool, also lovely, charming. Another guest room. Oh, the primary bedroom, I take it back, with a lounge. Outdoor dining, living room bar with a pool table. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, lovely. And we will read that article on a future stream, but you get the idea of the kind of, places that they were able to enjoy as their homes, and that's Kenya again. And I will put Jocelyne's pictures back up, and now back to the People magazine article. After Jocelyne gave birth to Diane, now 18 and a student in Montreal, and to Alec Jr., now 17 and living in Paris, she says that for a while she and Alec were like a team, a happy family. But, she says, in the last few years, he began to seem depressed. She blames his father's stringent control over the family businesses, especially the Allée France racing stables, which Alec has helped make one of the largest and most successful in Europe. When you are 50, you want to put your imprint on the business, she says, but he never had the power. And boy, we are going to hear a lot more about that dynamic between father and son in the articles upcoming today. The marriage broke down completely, she says. When Alec told her he had decided to date other women, it was clear to her, however, that he was serious about model Yarikova, whom he met through a friend last March. Yes, we went into that quite deeply on the on part 1. I don't think I was ever in love until now, says Alec of the young woman whose modeling portfolio he proudly shows visitors. She's a girl who is very impressive. Yes, and we heard a lot about this young lady and her background, I suppose, and how they came to be together on part 1, the previous stream. Last April, Alec moved out and filed for divorce a month later, but on September 3, in an incident both claim the other set up, Jocelyne entered their townhouse and found Alec wrapped in a towel and pointing a weapon, a bang-bang weapon. I'm trying to be careful because of YouTube, at her as a naked young blonde, not girlfriend Yarikova, ran down the hall. He was charged with menacing his wife and faces up to 1 year in prison. He did not serve a year in prison. Since then, Jocelyne has brought on Ed Rollins, the high-powered Republican public relations guru, and top divorce lawyer Bernard Clare. Alec, meanwhile, claims he makes only $100,000 a year and can't meet her demands. A settlement seems unlikely at present. I don't give in, says Alec. If her lawyers had been able to arrange it, she would have had me unalived via bang bang, let's put it that way. But Jocelyne says she's not hateful, just hurt. I really think, she says, I was living with somebody I didn't know. Well, how sad. And he was living with a woman that he no longer recognized. So I guess it was a little of both on each side. So that is a pretty good summary of the information that we covered in part 1. Now, moving forward, we go to the Vanity Fair article from March 1998, Bitter Spoils. The messy, scandal sheet divorce proceedings between Alec and Jocelyne Wildenstein may open the door on the secret history of the art world's richest and most powerful family, from the intelligence network the Wildensteins created to accusations they collaborated with the Nazis to the legendary contents of their vaults in New York and Switzerland. The author explores 4 generations of an insular art-dealing dynasty whose $5 billion fortune, Gulfstream 4, racing stable, private Virgin Island compound, and 66,000-acre Kenya ranch cannot erase the rancorous legacy handed down from father to son to son. And again, here are photographs of Jocelyne on the left and Alec Sr. on the right. Last September, Daniel Wildenstein's family celebrated his 80th birthday with a party at the 2-star restaurant Laurent, one of Paris's most fashionable spots. It was an intimate dinner for about 70 guests, to which Danielle's 64-year-old second wife Sylvia had invited only her husband's closest friends and his family, whose members had flown in for the occasion from New York, Montreal, and Palm Beach, some of them on the family's private Gulfstream 4. Danielle's 2 sons, Alec, 57, and Guy, 52, and Guy's wife, Christina, were there, as well as were all 6 of his grandchildren. Most of the friends in attendance that night were from the horse racing world, trainers and jockeys who had worked with the Wildensteins over the years. Horse racing was the old man's passion, and his stable, Allée France, is considered among the best in Europe. Almost no one from the international art world was there, even though there were few people in that world whom Daniel Wildenstein, probably the richest and most powerful art dealer on earth, didn't know. Wildenstein, always aloof from his peers, rarely ventured out in recent years, except for regular excursions to the track and his office. As friends and family toasted him that night, Daniel appeared relaxed and happy. It was an evening devoted to celebration, and there was a lot to celebrate. So many things had turned out as he had planned. In the 3.5 decades since he had taken over the 123-year-old family business from his father, Georges, Daniel had added greatly to the luster of the Wildenstein name and also amassed enormous wealth. Estimated at more than $5 billion, his fortune was the only one of that magnitude ever made in the art market. People didn't trifle with him or with his family, over which he maintained an iron control. They said behind his back that he was mean, ruthless, and frightening, but few really knew him, because that was how he wanted it. Other families had their public scandals, but his did not. Over the years, he had made sure very little had been written about it in the press. After all, he sold art to some of the world's greatest collectors, Mellons, Annenbergs, David Weiss, people who valued secrecy and privacy as much as he did. His family's vaults, hidden around Europe and America, contained one of the largest private collections of masterpieces in the world. It is believed that some of the paintings have not been seen in decades by anyone except Wildensteins. There is a rumor of a long-hidden Vermeer, and, according to Alec Wildenstein, Georges used to travel with a rolled-up Velázquez, which was virtually unknown. Daniel seemed determined to enjoy his birthday party as if nothing were wrong. But things were going wrong. Several days earlier, Alec had been arrested and thrown in jail, charged with threatening his estranged wife Jocelyne with a bang-bang weapon in their bedroom in the family's Manhattan townhouse. The next morning, Alec's face, haggard after a night in prison, was plastered across the tabloids. Ever since the news of Alec and Jocelyne's bitter divorce broke, 3 months before the birthday party, the press had been filled with stories about the Wildenstein family. Friends were stunned that they were finally making headlines. Some blamed Jocelyne for leaking information to the press. "It's her way of taking revenge on people who never have their names in the paper," says a friend of Sylvia's. Daniel, faced with the unprecedented situation of a loose cannon, seemed to be doing exactly the wrong thing. He declared war on Jocelyne, cutting off her credit cards and trying to have her barred from the family's homes, including the New York townhouse, the Chateau de Marienthal, reportedly the largest private residence in metropolitan Paris, the 66,000-acre Kenya ranch, and the family's private island compound in the British Virgins. But Jocelyne refused to be intimidated. After 19 years in the family, she had a powerful trump card: the stories no one had ever heard. Among those who seemed to be interested were the FBI and the New York State tax authorities, which, sources close to Jocelyne say, have already been in touch with her. The entire art world was riveted. Jocelyne could be the thread that unravels the whole sweater, says a collector who has known the Wildensteins for 2 decades. She could open up the whole story. And perhaps that's exactly what the scorned wife did. And before we continue, just to give a little visual to the story, in case you are not familiar with the Wildenstein family, we already saw Jocelyne and Alec. And here, continuing our cast of characters, this is Daniel Wildenstein, the father of Alec Sr. and of Guy, and the son of Georges. And this on the left, no, that's not Jocelyne. That's his second wife, Sylvia. It seems that indeed plastic surgery runs in the family, as well as the, wanting to avoid old age, despite, this is obviously an older gentleman. That hair does not match the face. And that hair and that face don't match one another or anything necessarily, but okay. So that's Daniel, the father. That is Sylvia, the stepmother. This is Guy Wildenstein back in the day with his wife Christina. And then this is Guy and Christina closer to present day, as you can see. A little grayer, a little older. But look at the face. She looks fantastic. She looks like the same lady. You can absolutely tell that those are the same people. So whatever, if they had any work done, it was very good and very minor. Looking good. Okay, so those are the Wildensteins. Back to the Vanity Fair article. On September 3, the day Alec was released from jail, the New York Times ran a story about artworks that had been stolen by the Nazis in 1940 and discovered recently in the possession of the Wildensteins. And we're going to read that article after we finish this one. The report might have passed with little notice had it not been for Danielle's comment to the newspaper that because the victims hadn't come forth at the time, they had no rights now. The remark was so absolutely unbelievable, so breathtakingly unbelievable, as one prominent art dealer put it, that it created a second controversy. People had whispered for years about the origins of the Wildenstein collection, that despite their being French Jews themselves, they had made money by trafficking in art looted by the Nazis. The family has always dismissed such talk. If you think something is ridiculous, why even comment on it, says Alec. The Wildenstein Gallery on East 64th Street is the most sumptuous private gallery in New York, built for the family in 1932 by Horace Trumbauer, whose firm also built the Widener Library at Harvard and the Philadelphia Art Museum. The Louis XVI-style townhouse down the street from the family's Manhattan home features a reception area with soaring 30-foot ceilings, marble floors, and a grand staircase that was modeled on the one in the Wildensteins' headquarters in Paris, an 18th century Hôtel Particulier, Particulier, on the Rue de la Boétie. In the basement, and in those of the 3 adjoining buildings, which the Wildensteins are believed to own, are lead-lined vaults. I would almost guarantee you that at the time this article was written that they they would have had to have owned those buildings, because there's no way that anyone with that kind of art cash would risk their vaults being broken into by someone who owned or had access to those other properties. Of course, for safety and security purposes, they would have owned all of the buildings. It's inconceivable that they would not have, or that they would not have had the money to do so. But I suppose it's possible, but I sincerely doubt it. Okay, continuing. At one point, their inventory was said to include some 400 Italian primitives, 2 Botticellis, 8 paintings each by Rembrandt and Rubens, 3 Velázquez's, 9 El Grecos, 5 Tintorettos, 79 Fragonards, and 7 Watteaus, not to mention an enormous collection of Impressionist paintings. No other art dealer in the world today has the stock of paintings and sculptures that the Wildensteins do. If it's obtainable privately, says one prominent art collector, the Wildensteins will have it. No one has their resources. In March 1997, James Marrow, a professor of art history at Princeton, was invited to the New York Gallery to examine 8 rare illuminated medieval manuscripts worth several $1 million. He had been asked to do so by Sam Fogg, a London dealer who was interested in purchasing one or more of the works. Marrow remembers being awed by the beauty of the sacred books as he sat in one of the gallery's upstairs viewing rooms. But he was also concerned. I saw the numbers immediately, he says, referring to reddish pencil markings, KA, following the numbers 879 through 886, of the kind made by the Nazis on artworks they had stolen. Marrow says he guessed that the numbers indicated that at some point the manuscripts had belonged to the Kahn family, important French Jewish art collectors, but he couldn't tell which member of the large Kahn family had owned them or when. Joseph Baillo, the Wildensteins' respected expert in 18th century French art, also seemed confused about who had owned the manuscripts. He said he thought it was the Kahns, but he didn't say which one. He looked at registration cards and went to the gallery's library to check, but he kept saying he didn't know, says Marrow. I knew with a dealer? That's not right. Baillo denies ever speaking with Marrow about the previous owners of the manuscripts. Unable to get a clear proof of title from the dealer, Fogg ultimately backed out. In the meantime, a German manuscript expert Marrow had contacted sent back notes from the Nazi archives in Koblenz. They described the manuscripts in detail and listed them as part of the art collection of Alphonse Kahn, stolen by the Nazis from his home near Paris in October 1940 after he had fled to London. Marrow contacted Kahn's great-nephew, Francis Varin, in Paris. He was shocked to learn that Varin already knew the Wildensteins had the manuscripts, thanks to an investigation by Hector Feliciano, the author of the groundbreaking 1995 book The Lost Museum, about art looted from French Jews by the Nazis. Varin had been trying to get them back, and it was in the midst of this effort that the Wildensteins, having held the manuscripts in their vaults for more than 40 years, had tried to sell them. The Wildensteins had rejected Varin's claim. First, Guy Wildenstein had written to say the manuscripts had been bought by his grandfather Georges from Alphonse Kahn before the Second World War. A later response from a Wildenstein attorney insisted that 3 of the manuscripts had been bought not from Alphonse Kahn, but from Edouard Kahn, a distant cousin, in 1909. Either way, the Wildensteins contended the manuscripts had been stolen by the Germans from their Paris gallery, not from Alphonse Kahn's home, and returned to them after the war. Yes, I believe the Nazis were known for returning the things that they stole to their victims. Pretty sure I've heard that one before. Yeah, Sounds like a plausible story. In September, Daniel Wildenstein gave the New York Times yet a different story. He said the manuscripts had been bought from Edouard Kahn by Georges Wildenstein's father, Nathan, sometime between 1903 and 1914, and he had documents to prove it. He said they had been looted not from the gallery, but from a Wildenstein vault at the Banque de France, and then returned after the war. Stunningly, he dismissed the KA markings as insignificant. I can't understand the claim, he said. It's an absolutely crazy thing, 100 years after an object was bought, to come with a claim without any paper whatsoever. They claim it 50 years later. They had no claim for 50 years. I tell you something. If tomorrow someone steals a picture from me, I make a declaration to the police that it's stolen. After 30 years, the man who stole it owns it. Ah, yes, the well-known finders keepers law. Indeed. In December, Alec Wildenstein agreed to meet with Vanity Fair to talk about the Kahn manuscripts and about his family and their history. It is one of the rare interviews on these subjects that any member of the family has ever given. Sitting at a long table in a conference room he has rented for the meeting at the Four Seasons Hotel in Manhattan, Alec is flanked by his attorneys. He is short like his father and brother, and he has an owlish face that makes him seem younger than his 57 years. Okay, Vanity Fair weighs in on owl. On part one, we were trying to decide if Alec Wildenstein Sr. more resembled a frog, a pug, or an owl. And we had one vote for pug. But I think I'm leaning a little bit more toward frog. My personal preference is frog, but I am going to go with whatever the audience decides. So if you have a vote for Alec Wildenstein, more looks like a pug, a frog, or an owl, please feel free to leave your comment in the chat or in the comments under the video. Okay, continuing. A little nervous now, he fingers a stack of papers in front of him, which includes notes from a conversation he had with his father to prepare for our interview. I am speaking today, Alec says, only because I feel there are so many crazy things said that I feel it's important to put the truth in order. Alec makes it clear that the last few months have been difficult for his family. He is fearful that the press attention has made them vulnerable to kidnappers, or, as Jews, targets for Arab, YouTube doesn't care for that word, so I'll just say, people who like to do naughty things, bad things against other people, terrorizing them, as a matter of fact. There you go. He says he and Guy have hired security guards for Alec's two children, Diane, 18, and Alec Jr., 17, and Guy's son David, 18, and three daughters, Vanessa, 16, Olivia, 14, and Samantha, 12. As Alec views it, the Kahn manuscript controversy is linked to the furor over Jocelyne. Let's look at it objectively. Alphonse Kahn, after the war, claimed objects. None of the manuscripts was ever mentioned, for good reason. They were no longer in his possession. Alec says, the person who is claiming something now is a nephew who has no idea of what he is doing. He is probably pushed by someone to create the problem. He is trying to be a nuisance factor. He is doing what my wife is doing. He is thinking that by embarrassing us, we will give him something. When one is the legal owner of important works of art, Francis Varenne says, it would be absurd and nonsense not to claim them from the moment one knows their actual location. It is what we are doing with all the works of art that belong to Alphonse Kahn, which we are locating and tracing now. It is true that Alphonse Kahn never claimed the manuscripts after the war. He was an old man by then, and he had never made an inventory of his vast art collection. And there, another public service announcement from French Dip Empire. Make an inventory of your valuables, whatever they may be, whether you are an art collector and a billionaire, or a mere mortal. It is good for insurance purposes. Keep that information in a safe place. Okay, continuing. He made many claims from memory, says Feliciano, who tracked the manuscripts using Nazi looting inventories. See, the Nazis kept track. They kept excellent records. Not an admirable group of people, but I suppose a broken clock can be right once about something? Is that okay to say? Keep good records. That's all I can say. And also U.S. Army archives in Washington. Although Feliciano and Varenne have so far been unable to determine how Georges Wildenstein got 5 of the 8 manuscripts after the war, 3 were put on display at the French National Library in 1949 in the hopes that their owner would come forward. Kahn had died in 1948, and no one from his family showed up to claim them, but Georges Wildenstein did. Despite doubts by curators at the library, they handed them over to Wildenstein. The records indicate that he pushed hard to get them, says Feliciano. Alec Wildenstein insists that his grandfather owned the manuscripts. Like his father, he says the family has proof of this, which it cannot divulge because of possible legal action by the Kahn heirs. Alec also contends that the KA markings may not have been Nazi markings at all. I saw the Wildenstein and the Rothschild art looted by the Nazis, Alec says. The Rothschild and Wildenstein art was done in ink. I never saw something done in pencil. I don't see why the Germans would have done anything in pencil, because it's easy to erase something in pencil. Feliciano disagrees. This is how they marked, in pencil, he says, despite the evidence that the Germans stole the manuscripts from the home of Alphonse Kahn, including the fact that the manuscripts were listed with the numbers attached in a Nazi inventory of Kahn's collection. Probably no one today knows whether Georges Wildenstein, who died in 1963, claimed them because he believed he owned them, or merely saw an opportunity and took it. Well, I think I know where I fall on that question. How about you in the audience? What do you think? Do you think he genuinely believed he owned them, or do you think that he saw an opportunity and he took it? Okay, continuing with the article. Alec was 9 years old when his grandfather claimed the manuscripts, and anything he knows about the war years, he says he was told by his father. One feels some sympathy for him as he tries to defend his grandfather and father with their version of events. In fact, friends say that this is the story of Alec's life, doing what Danielle tells him to. Indeed, in his divorce battle, Alec, nearing 60, has claimed that he has almost nothing he can call his own. His father controls all the assets, and, according to one of Jocelyne's divorce affidavits, the bills are mostly paid through a mysterious network of corporations and accounts. I am told that none of the family businesses or properties, including the properties used exclusively by my husband and me, are in my husband's name. On paper, everything is owned by my elderly father-in-law or by foreign corporations, reads the affidavit. Nor was Alec's life really his own. From the time he and his brother Guy were born, it was assumed they would follow their father into the family business. I never had a choice. There was none, Alec says. I was told from since I was like this, I would be an art dealer. Even in her anger at her husband, Jocelyne is sympathetic. When you are 57 and you're still the son and you're still the same as when you were 17, says Jocelyne in her thick French accent. When you run a business so big like this, but you still have your father behind yourself all the time as the shadow, you're never your own master. When you reach 50, you like to have a certain freedom because it's really the time you can show you achieved something. Yes, Alec had the midlife crisis to beat all midlife crises, except maybe one I can think of, but that's playing out currently on YouTube. But anyway, as Alec defends his family, he seems not to be terribly engaged. Like his father, he appears not to realize how serious the current challenges are. You'd think, especially with all the activity with Swiss accounts and all these new questions about looted art, that they'd admit a mistake was made, apologize, and return the manuscripts, says one major New York dealer. But that, say people who know the Wildensteins, has never been the Wildenstein style. They will pursue a law case to the end. They don't seem to care how badly they come out of it looking, says the same dealer. In some ways, it is very difficult for them to think that they are wrong, explains an old friend of Alec's who admits that even he was taken aback by the aggressiveness of the family's response. It is about winning, says one art expert. Danielle has to win. A man who has worked for the Wildensteins sees it differently. They feel they are superior to other people, he says simply. The Kahn manuscript dispute is not the only controversy involving provenance that the family has been embroiled in. In 1983, an elderly German woman, Gerda Dorothea de Wert, learned that a painting by Monet, stolen from her during World War II, had been sold to a New York art collector by the Wildensteins in 1957. The painting, according to a judge's ruling in the 11-year legal battle, appeared to have been bought by the Wildensteins from a Swiss dealer named François Reichenbach. In a 1984 deposition, former Wildenstein president Harry Brooks indicated that the Wildensteins did not know from whom Reichenbach had gotten the painting, but court documents revealed that there was another version of the painting's provenance in the Wildenstein records. In his definitive 5-volume catalogue raisonné on Monet, completed in 1992, Daniel had skipped over Reichenbach and de Wert, claiming his family had obtained Champs de Blé à Vitoy directly from Monet's dealer, Durand-Ruel. The court never addressed the provenance discrepancy because in 1994 it had upheld an earlier court ruling that de Wert had not searched hard enough for the painting. Alec, nevertheless, insisted, yes, so apparently the court supported the finders keepers law. Not law, but, the finders keepers rule. What do we want to call that? Alec, nevertheless, insists his father's story was right. What Harry Brooks know about Monet, you could put on the head of a pin. My father was the man who made the book on Monet. He started when I was born, and it took him 45 years to bring it out. Provenance is not the only gray area surrounding certain paintings sold by the Wildensteins. Last October, shortly before Sotheby's was to put at auction the estate of Mildred Allen, widow of Charles Allen Jr., who was the head of the New York investment firm Allen & Company, it withdrew from the sale a painting by Manet that Allen had bought from Wildenstein in 1959. Art experts examined the painting, La Liseuse, and raised questions about its authenticity. A painting like that may not have been seen in many years, says an auction house official who examined it. This is a real humdinger because it is certified as authentic in the catalogue raisonné that Daniel Wildenstein co-wrote. Today, the validity of the painting is still in question. Our opinion, and Mr. Wildenstein's opinion, is that this is an authentic painting, says Thomas Bolin of Putney, Twombly, Hall, and Herson, which represents the Allen estate. However, as Bolin himself acknowledges, art experts consulted so far do not agree, so it remains off the market. There's no resolution. It's still under a lot of investigation, says Bolin. We're getting other opinions. Alec Wildenstein dismisses those who doubt that the painting is a Manet. We happen to make the book on Manet. I think we know a bit more about Manet than either Sotheby's or Christie's. The issue of the authenticity of Wildenstein paintings also came up in 1992 when the New York developer Arnold Gumowitz sued Wildenstein and Company, claiming that Peasant Laboring, a painting attributed to Georges Seurat that he had bought for $600,000 from the gallery in 1987, had been questioned by a curator at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. He also claimed that the man who authenticated the painting had been paid by the Wildensteins. Movie of the Week in the chat says, finders keepers rule. Sounds good, yes. Okay. Continuing with the article. According to Gumowitz's attorney, John Hughes, in 1995, the case was settled in a confidential, out-of-court settlement. In another 1992 incident, Laura Holtz, who was then the Wildenstein's photo archivist, was assigned to organize photographs of the works of the 18th century sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon, which Wildenstein had just bought from the leading Houdon authority, Harvard Arneson. As Holtz sorted through them, she says, she checked the Wildenstein's library for references to Houdon and was shocked to find that in the margin of one monograph, next to the photo of the sculpture Princesse Clotilde Xavier, was the pencil marking, fake, as per Harvard Arneson. Holtz says she immediately informed her boss, Joseph Baillo, then a vice president of Wildenstein. He said to me, "We can't tell Paris it's a fake. We own that Houdon, and we can't say it's a fake." Holtz says, "I'd written fake on the file, and he said, 'Erase it.' I said, 'I can't do that,' whereupon he started screaming at me and said, 'You do what I tell you to do,' and he walked out and slammed the door." 2 months later, in the middle of an argument with Baello, Holtz raised the issue of the fake Houdon, and she says she was fired the following day. When she told Baello that she would tell Guy Wildenstein about the statue, she says the towering Baello grabbed her, severely injuring her shoulder. Holtz filed a lawsuit against Baello and the gallery for assault and battery. Rather than settle, Wildenstein fought her all the way to a jury trial. And Lord knows they'd have the money to fight. Last June, a jury determined that Baillo had touched the plaintiff, Laura Holtz, in a hostile or offensive manner, but acquitted Baillo and Wildenstein of all charges. Wait, what? Asked to comment, a Wildenstein spokesperson says, Holtz's allegations were rejected by the jury, and their verdict speaks for itself. Holtz now intends to appeal the decision. The mysteries surrounding Wildenstein artworks have been heightened by the fact that the family has sold masterpieces that scholars and collectors had long lost track of. 3 years ago, the prominent investment banker and art collector Michel David-Vey is said to have paid several $1 million to acquire Jacques-Louis David's Psyche, circa 1780, from the Wildensteins. An old master dealer who had himself been searching for the painting for years recalls that even the Louvre had no idea where it was. In their efforts to maintain total privacy, the Wildensteins have created an operation that is a secret state unto itself. No one, not even employees, really knows what they own or where it is. In fact, the art is secreted in vaults around Switzerland, in an old nuclear bunker in upstate New York, and in a converted firehouse on New York's Upper East Side, among other places. The Wildensteins themselves can't keep track of what they own. I mean, there are pictures I have never seen that my great-grandfather bought. Alec says, they are in vaults and crazy places, in back of other things, and sometimes I go and rediscover them. We found a sculpture not very long ago that my father thought had been lost since my great-grandfather was dead. Hey, everybody out there in the audience, take a look behind your sofa. Take a look under the sofa cushions. Go check your closets. You may have a Wildenstein painting or sculpture hiding somewhere. And you know the rule, finders keepers. Just don't tell anyone. Continuing with the article, a friend of the family's even claims that Daniel told her he owns an unknown painting by Vermeer, an artist by whom only 35 or 36 paintings are known, all in museums. Perhaps that is what Jocelyne is talking about when she claims there is a painting worth $100 million in the family vaults. This painting will never drop in price. It is very rare. If you go to all of the museums in the world, you will find only a couple of pieces, says Jocelyne, but she refuses to identify the artist. When the Wildensteins move their artworks, they do it in their own fleet of armored cars, marked with a variety of misleading corporate names, and in private jets. No one knows what they own, so no one knows what they sell, says a man who worked for the family until recently. They can take a painting worth $15 million, put it on a jet for Saudi Arabia, sell it to a sheikh for cash. There's no record. No one sees what they are selling. And no one sees what they do with the cash. I would think the tax authorities would want to know about that, among others, but, definitely the tax authorities. And indeed, the Wildensteins did get in trouble with the tax authorities. We're going to be looking more at that on a future stream. So back to this article. Another ex-employee points out that the private transportation system is useful for moving paintings around the world to take advantage of the best tax situations for clients. Well, sure, but I imagine when you have this kind of transportation, you can move a lot of things around. I mean, they've got the art, they've got the cash. I mean, you could move just about anything or anyone around the world, I would imagine, and probably keep it pretty quiet. The business was founded in Oh, you know what? Let's take a look. Okay. I'll go a little longer. Okay, before I take a break. We've only been going for about a little over an hour. So if you're there, if you've been enjoying the stream, why don't you hit the like button and go ahead and subscribe to French Dip Empire. And I will continue reading. This article from Vanity Fair from, I believe it was 1998. The business was founded in 1875 by Nathan Wildenstein, a French Jew from the Alsatian village of Feigerschein, who had fled to Paris when the Prussian army invaded in 1870. Originally a tailor, Nathan ran a struggling bric-a-brac and antiques business before he turned to art dealing. He specialized in 18th century French paintings, buying many of these works in junk shops before this artistic period became fashionable. As 18th century French art grew enormously popular, Nathan became wealthy. Today, the family's vaults are said still to contain artworks that Nathan bought, paintings by artists such as Fragonard, Boucher, and Chardin. According to Alec, it was Nathan who opened the Wildenstein Gallery in New York in 1902, the London Gallery in 1925, and the Buenos Aires Gallery in 1929 or 1930. He was a very small man with a tremendous wit. He was a great gambler, says Alec, of his great-grandfather. Nathan, who died in 1934, was by all accounts a decent man who never raced his horses under his own name, because he'd once overheard spectators at a race shouting, "Rothschild is a crook!" and he did not ever want to be spoken of that way. Nathan's son, Georges, who entered the business in 1910 at the age of 18, was even more brilliant than his father. He probably had the greatest artistic eye in the family, says a curator who knew Georges. He was also much tougher than Nathan. It was Georges who set up the Wildensteins' famous network of spies, notaries public in French villages, art historians, and auction house employees. For a retainer, they fed him information that made the Wildensteins legendary for their ability to know what artworks were available, where they were, and at what price. You'd be surprised who they were. Very highly placed people, says a former auction house official. Georges was even more aggressive than his father had been at buying up art. One of the first dealers to anticipate how sought-after paintings by such impressionists as Monet would later become, he bought their paintings in bulk. Although Georges didn't care for modern art, he helped finance a high school friend, the famed dealer Paul Rosenberg, in his efforts to popularize Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque, and Fernand Léger. Though successful, Georges was not well liked. He was a cold man, says a curator who knew him. He was manipulative, says another art expert. In 1933, according to those close to the Wildensteins, Georges and Rosenberg ended their business dealings when Rosenberg learned that his old friend had been carrying on an affair with his wife. In early 1941, several months after the Germans invaded France, Georges fled the country with his family and set up the business headquarters in New York. It was sui generis, recalls one museum curator, this old-style red velvet place. In those days, the New York gallery scene was made up of a handful of dealers, M. Knoedler and Company, and Duveen among the more prominent, and Georges quickly became one of the most formidable and controversial. In 1955, the Wildenstein Gallery was accused of bugging Knoedler's telephones in order, it was assumed, to find out its competitors' inventory and prices, and also what customers were looking for. A gallery employee, the legendary salesman J. Rusak, confessed to having hired a private investigator to do the job. The incident may have been one reason why Georges was never invited to join the Art Dealers Association of America. Possibly. What a naughty boy. Daniel Wildenstein had started working for the gallery after getting his degree in art history from the Sorbonne in 1939. If his father had been known for his incredible eye and business acumen, Daniel would give his family something just as remarkable: the unprecedented power to write the history of art, and even rewrite it. He hired armies of scholars to create catalogues raisonnés, exhaustive books on individual artists and their works. Being the publisher of such books confers enormous power, the ability to authenticate paintings and to determine their location and the history of their ownership. Today, as a publisher of catalogues raisonnés, the Wildensteins virtually control the scholarship on many artists, from Boucher to Monet. Although the Wildenstein catalogues raisonnés are widely respected in the art world, there has always been a cloud of suspicion about them, says one prominent art expert. I mean, honestly, the degree to which the Wildensteins have been allowed to get away with so much sussy business makes the entire art world seem completely sussy. I mean, not that many other things about the way the art world works doesn't already make it seem very shady and suspicious, but just looking at this one family and the way that they operate, so many areas, so many opportunities to call these people out for doing the dirty, that there can be only... Obviously, having so much power would allow them to wield that power, but it also would tend to implicate other denizens of the art world as being possibly just as corrupt, or as corrupt as they could possibly be, lacking the power of the Wildensteins. I guess as corrupt as their power can allow them to be. But anyway, those accusations have been made by many people beyond myself. So back to the article. Most notably, Georges' Gauguin catalogue raisonné was publicly denounced in the Times literary supplement in 1965 by the well-known art historian Douglas Cooper. Pedigrees and quotations have been juggled to suit private needs and, Cooper wrote, Gauguin's oeuvre has been shorn of some authentic works and adulterated with others that do not belong. One art historian recalls,
They asked me to write a catalogue raisonné, but they wouldn't give me final authority over the contents, so I refused. It is a cold and wet afternoon, and Jocelyne Wildenstein has lit a fire in her living room in the family's New York townhouse. The room, with its high ceiling, gilded moldings, and silk-covered walls, is surprisingly cozy. 10 paintings by Bonnard, it's the Bonnard room, hang on the walls. We've heard so much about it in the Part 1 stream articles. Jocelyne is wearing a purple knit Chanel suit with fuchsia trim and jewelry she has designed herself, a choker, bracelet, and ring, all made up of gold monkeys. I suppose children throughout recent history have made similar necklaces out of those, like, what was that called? The bucket of monkeys? What was that thing? You know, the little plastic monkeys game where you sort of hook them together? Barrel of monkeys. That was it. Barrel of monkeys. I think children all across at least the United States have made similar necklaces. Perhaps not as expensive and fancy, but I'm sure they enjoyed them equally. Settled on one of the room's couches, upholstered in bright yellow embroidered silk, she is trying to recall as best she can the family's history. She says it isn't easy. The family didn't talk much about its past. I've never seen the pictures of Nathan, she says, and surprisingly, when you realize now, I've never seen Daniel having a picture of his parents. Well, that is unusual. Since April, when Alec asked her for a divorce, Jocelyne has lived on the 3rd floor of the family home, a pariah, cut off from the other family members who live there. The doors to the communal living room, library, dining room, and pool, which is in the basement, have been locked, and she has not been given the keys. Everything is closed, she says. Everybody goes, I think, to one direction when I walk by. They don't turn. Family friends such as financier Nathaniel de Rothschild and his parents, Liliane and Elie, and Michel Davidve, are keeping her at arm's length. Movie of the week, yes, Barrel of Monkeys. Thank you. Thank you, chat, for helping me out. As lavishly as they live and entertain, the Wildensteins form an insular society, friends say. They're like a tribe, says one. They don't really mix. They live in the same houses and share their vacations. Daniel, a friend says, hates intruders. He is antisocial. And he sets the tone for the family. He controls those boys the way Georges controlled him, says one woman who knows the family well. Georges, by all accounts, was a domineering figure. His life revolved around the gallery and his racehorses, and he expected total commitment from his family. Both Alec and Guy went to the Lycée Français in New York, but were pulled out of the school by their grandfather for several months each year when the spring racing season opened in France. The entire family would set sail on the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mary, or the USS United States, says Alec, and return the same way in October, when the season ended. Danielle wed Martine Capferret, the daughter of a wealthy French Jewish family, in 1939, in a marriage that friends say was arranged by Georges. The couple lived with him and his wife Jeanne throughout Georges' life. That feels a little too close for comfort. And you know it wasn't because of lack of funds. But by the 50s, Georges had begun to lose his grip on Danielle. His son had expensive tastes, of which Georges disapproved, even as he indulged them. Well, then he didn't disapprove that much, did he? Danielle became a regular at, 122, I suppose it's 122, the famous society brothel in Paris, and a frequent customer and friend of the legendary Madame Claude, who had her own celebrated, for YouTube purposes, I'm going to call this a world's oldest profession ring. And again, remember what I said about if you befriend the person who enables your addictions, if you befriend your plastic surgeon, if you befriend your dealer, if you befriend your madam, you probably have a problem and you might want to get some help for that. It seems like this family has compounded the addictions. They've got the gamba, they've got the madams, they've got the well, I would say that the lying and the deceptions and the frauds are an addictive quality. They seem to be addicted to what deception, I suppose, getting one over on someone. They seem to enjoy getting one over on getting something over on people. Deception, I would say. The broad stroke deception. Okay, Danielle was very good at Saint-Vendeur, that house, Jocelyne says with a laugh. If you wanted to go to the devil room or, I don't know, every room had a different theme. They were all the devil room, let's face it. Okay. Continuing. When Alec was a teenager, Danielle initiated him. Okay, this is getting into more about the sensitive topic, so I might have to change the language a little bit and be careful with the subject matter. This is, for adults only at this point. When Alec was a teenager, Danielle initiated him into the mysteries of paid-for intimacy. I have known Madame Claude since I was 15 and a half, says Alec. She was a good friend of mine. My father and I had great respect for her. I knew all her girls. While Guy, who was still a little boy, stayed home with his grandparents and mother, Alec and Danielle hung out together chasing women. According to Jocelyne, people thought they were brothers. Well, that's unhealthy, to put it mildly. Probably criminal, definitely amoral. Georges hated Danielle's lifestyle, the women, the way he spent money, says one friend of the family's. Danielle frequented nightclubs with a girlfriend said to be an Afghan princess, and he was a fixture on the Côte d'Azur. He was quite a playboy, good-looking and a big show-off, says Jocelyne. He would run barefoot from the portal of the Carlton at Cannes, oh, that's spelled wrong, and jump onto the skis in the water to water ski. Eventually, Georges withdrew his support from Danielle as heir to the business in favor of Guy, only 18 at the time. Georges really wanted it badly, says Jocelyne. My husbands say this. Danielle was all the time seen in magazines. It was just too much. But Georges died too soon to make it happen, and Danielle took his place as the head of the business. He moved out of the family home, the Chateau de Marental, and took an apartment in Paris with his new mistress and current wife, Sylvia Roth, a model who had once been a messenger in the early days of the Israeli army. Well, how exciting. Poor Martine, she was sweet and out of her league, says a friend of Danielle's first wife. She was stuck in the country alone, while Sylvia was covered in diamonds and dancing on the tables in clubs. Danielle, Jocelyne says, used to tell anybody who asked that he hated his parents and he was never happier than the day they died. Now, okay, that's just awful, albeit somewhat understandable, although I wonder, why one would nurse this hatred one's whole life rather than just taking some of the money and running. And this claim that they had no money of their own. Here's Danielle kind of engaging in this behavior that we then see Alec repeating after him. Alec claiming, I only make $100,000 a year, which is nothing for a billionaire, but in 1990s money, that was okay, but if he had $100,000, he couldn't sock some money away and buy some freedom, or invest in a business and, try to strike out on his own. I mean, really, there were many, many things he could have done with the access to the money that he had. He was spending money on jewelry. He was spending money on clothing. He was spending money on on plastic surgery. He was spending money on loose women. He could have taken some of that money and put it into an investment and bought some freedom. Alec could have. Danielle could have. Neither did. They nursed this hatred for their parents, specifically the fathers, who were dictating their lives, and yet they did it again. Like, Danielle hated his father, but then he did it to Alec. Why? It makes no sense. And they just seem to be just miserable, troubled people. But they kept sticking together and drawing closer and closer, pulling the children closer and tighter. And anytime somebody has a problem with something, rather than trying to work it out, they just attack, they just lash out, they punish. And of course, mostly with the money, the thing they have the greatest, their greatest weapon of control. And it's so sad and terrible. Movie of the Week in the chat says, this is tragic on all fronts. It is. It's terrible. I really struggle to see how anyone would envy anything these people had, because it's just nothing they ever did anything good with, it seems. Nothing. I'm wrong. I take it back. The resorts are beautiful. They did a great job building their resorts, so I'll give them that. The Kenya Ranch and the island resort in the British Virgin Islands, beautiful. Okay, and hopefully they did something good for the conservation of wildlife in Africa. I hope that actually is happening. At least something good could come out of all of this nastiness and nonsense. So, okay, continuing with the Vanity Fair article. His mother, meaning Danielle's mother, Jean Wildenstein, died in 1964. In 1980, Jocelyne remembers, she saw for the first time the Chateau de Marintal, where Danielle was born and raised. Yes, everything was catastrophic, she says. All the furniture had covers, and on the carpets you could see all the pee of the pet chow. The curtains were burned from the pee. Danielle, hate this house. Okay, I can understand this. This is another thing that I've never truly understood. So many times one reads about people with more means than the average person. And by means, I mean, monetary means and resources. If you have a lot of money, you also have a lot of staff in your big home. There's absolutely no reason for there to be urine stains on anything in your chateau when you have billions of dollars. Because even if there were an accident, presumably there are staff to clean it up. And any damage that would be quote unquote permanent, you could just replace. Wood can be replaced, curtains can be replaced, carpets. If you can't clean them, you can replace them. And why wouldn't you? That's the way most people, those quote-unquote normal people, the mere mortals, that's how most people handle it. And if you didn't handle it that way, it would be perceived in the normal realm as one having a psychological disorder of some sort. Like the hoarding. We addressed this in part 1. It was described that they would hoard art. And one could also say that a billionaire is hoarding money, but nobody ever wants to deal with that hoarding situation. It's only the, person of lesser means that has the junked up, small house that has to be called a hoarder, like, a mental problem, like it's a mental disorder and something that needs dealing with. But we don't have a team that goes in and does this for billionaires and whatnot. And perhaps we should. Movie of the Week in the chat says, it's way too common, makes one think rich people are all nuts. Well, Movie of the Week, French Dip Empire, this YouTube channel has not been around all that long, but I can tell you in my many years of experience with the subject matter, it definitely could probably be in whatever the next iteration of the DSM is. I'm not sure if they're on 5 or 6 at this point. Whatever the next iteration of the DSM is, you could definitely come up with a disorder of wealth, the incredibly wealthy, or even the merely sort of wealthy, the lesser, the poor of the rich, shall we say? The people that most people would think, I think, are wealthy, but these kind of people would consider to be paupers. It's something that seems to be there. And
I think it goes in with denial and some other issues, but this isn't a psychology stream. So let's get back to the article, shall we? But I'm telling you, if you keep watching the streams as we go over different topics and different families, you will see this again and again and again. I mean, just the Ethel Kennedy house comes to mind, talking about the dogs making messes all over, the various animals that they collected, making messes all over the house and no one ever dealing with it despite all the money and the staff. Okay, anyway, back to the article. For 10 years after Georges died, Daniel would go to his grave on All Saints' Day and get on his knees and beat the ground with his fists, says one friend of the family's. He was so angry at Georges. I'm going to go over that again. For 10 years after his father died, Daniel Wildenstein would visit his grave and beat the ground with his fists in anger. I say the guy had some issues. But people say he soon became the same kind of father. Yes, if you were here for part 1, we know that to be all too true. He wanted his boys always close to him, going so far as to forbid Alec to go to college, insisting that he could learn all he needed to know about the family business by working in the gallery. And as we learned in part 1, one of the articles in part 1 informed us that Alec very much wanted to go to college, which is shocking. He had the money and he had an excuse not to, but he still wanted to do the thing. And his dad wouldn't let him. For many years, he refused to let his boys marry. He did not want us to get married, Alec says. He considered marriage an unnatural state. Daniel Wildenstein, a man who married twice. Okay, if you make one mistake, I understand. You know, everyone gets a what do you call it? A mulligan, right? A do-over. You make one mistake, that happens. The trial marriage, the starter marriage, right? But then if you decide that it's an unnatural state, and you decide to enter into that unnatural state a second time, what does that make you? I think that makes you the unnatural one, not marriage. But anyway, logic seems to be escaping these folks. Alec married Jocelyne in Las Vegas in 1978. And again, my public service announcement, the French Dip Empire public service announcement to all listeners: do not get married in Las Vegas. It is a bad omen for your future marital happiness. I've seen that time and time again as well. And we will see it on this stream multiple times as we move forward with different topics. I promise you. Alec married Jocelyne in Las Vegas in 1978. Without telling Danielle, who refused to go to their wedding reception in Switzerland. How rude. But did he send a gift? That's what I'd like to know. I'd rather have the gift than your presence at my reception. Thank you. Presents over presents. You have to figure out which way it is spelled. There is no question, friends say, that Danielle adored his boys, but he was hard on both of them. He would put Alec and Guy down in front of horse trainers, in front of everyone. He used to scream at Alec until Alec would get sick in the bathroom of the yacht. The 168-foot Southern Breeze, which the family has since sold, one friend recalls. I mean, that's heartbreaking and disgusting for Danielle. I mean, what was the point of being on the best boat in the world with the best food and the best servants when this nightmare was going on? Imagine. Still, the family stuck close together. And this pathology, what is it? What is it? Why could these boys, men, not make the break? Why could they not make the break in their minds and say enough, put their foot down and if I may, grow a pair and move on with their lives and try to be their own person? What is that compelling power? I fail to understand it, but we see it time and time again in these cases. And I really just don't get it. Really don't. Like his father,
Daniel was such a powerful force in the art world that he could hold in abeyance all the whispers about the secrets of their fabulous collection. The Kahn manuscript controversy and other incidents, however, have focused attention once again on Georges Wildenstein and the period when he fled France in 1941 for New York City. I have made a point not to see Daniel, says Alain Vernet, a journalist and the grandson of the celebrated French Jewish art collector Adolphe Schloss. What is the use of telling him about his father? He knows. He is referring to the charge made privately by others that Georges Wildenstein collaborated with the Nazis, selling paintings to Hitler and allegedly even helping the Nazis locate, through Georges' representative in Paris, important collections that had been hidden from them. It was my father, Vernet recalls, who received a call in Nice, and Georges came to see him at the Hôtel Royal at his suite. Georges told him he could be an honorary Aryan, the status given to Jews regarded as helpful on key issues. Himself, his wife, my mother's 3 brothers, and have a sum in dollars in Switzerland in a special account if we gave the location of our collection. He said he was asked by the Germans to ask my father for this arrangement. The Schloss collection was one of France's greatest, known for its Dutch and Flemish masters. The family had hidden it in a chateau in central France, but were finally forced to reveal the whereabouts of the collection in April 1943, when the Nazis arrested them. My father kicked Wildenstein out, and he never came back, says Vernet. As he remembers it, this meeting took place in early 1941. And I suppose it goes without saying, but I will mention it nonetheless, that this alleged offer that Wildenstein supposedly made to Schloss of the Aryan, honorary Aryan status would have been basically saying, I will protect you from possible death. Because of, if they had been, and as did happen, the Nazis arrested them, obviously that could have meant that they were going to be sent to their, being unalived in that big way that happened in World War II. You know what I'm talking about. It's a sensitive topic. I don't want to, get into that. But, for YouTube purposes, I'm avoiding mentioning certain words. You know what I mean. But it's almost like as if Wildenstein had held a bang bang weapon to this man's head and said, tell me where the collection is or I will hand you over to the Nazis. It's pretty awful. Okay, so continuing. According to documents in the U.S. National Archives, the previous November, Georges had met in Aix-en-Provence with Hitler's chief art dealer Karl Haberstock, and over a period of 4 or 5 days, he made a deal. The Germans would return to him part of his collection, confiscated by them from a hiding place in a castle in Sourches, and allow one of his trusted non-Jewish employees, Roger Decroix, to run the Paris gallery. In return, Georges agreed to sell to Hitler and his top officials anything they wanted out of his own stock, and to help them find any other artworks they were interested in. Well, that's called collaboration. Soon thereafter, Georges left France for New York with his wife Jeanne, 23-year-old Danielle, and his wife Martine, and Alec, who had been born in Marseille several months earlier. While Georges spent the war years in the United States, many of his artworks, as per the agreement, were returned to his Paris gallery. Decroix, whom one of the American OSS interrogators, Theodore Rousseau, would later identify as perhaps the worst of the collaborationists among the dealers, worked hand-in-hand with Hitler's art dealer Haberstock. According to accounts based on archival material in Feliciano's The Lost Museum and Lynn Nicholas's award-winning 1995 The Our Crime of Europa. I'm avoiding saying the word, which I have highlighted in the text. You can look on the screen if you want to read it, if you don't understand what I mean by Our Crime, but it is that right there. Decroix, on behalf of the Wildensteins, sold paintings to Goering and other high Nazi officials, and in one deal that fell through, was ready to take possession of a group of stolen Impressionist paintings that the Nazis, who regarded them as degenerate art, were dumping. After the war, efforts by the French government to bring charges against the Wildenstein firm were rejected by the courts on the ground that there was no proof of voluntary sales to the enemy, according to the Our Crime of Europa. Safely in the United States, Georges became a champion for restitution, says Mark Mazerovsky, head of the Holocaust Art Restitution Project. Georges wrote an article for a French resistance magazine in 1943 denouncing collaborationist art dealers. A tour de force of denial, there's that word, many in the art world thought. I think Georges almost believed he did not collaborate, says Mazerovsky. He made himself a victim. And I think this goes to support my belief that I think that what they're getting off on more than any specific thing is getting away with it, getting one over on people. And it seems that the bigger the lie, the bigger the charade, the more that they're enjoying, or the more obvious, I should say, the more obvious the con, the more happy they are to be allowed to get away with it. And it really boggles my mind as to why. I mean, yes, they had power. I understand that. But they're not the only wealthy people. They're not the only powerful people. It does make me wonder why no one would want to mess with them until then. Why no one wouldn't want to try to call them on their bluff. But well, they certainly got, I guess karma came back on them, as we're going to find out continuing this stream and future streams as well. Okay, continuing with this article. Alec adamantly denies that his grandfather collaborated with the Nazis, says Alec. As far as my father remembers, there never was. He never even remembers a meeting with Haberstock. Alec says that the OSS, of course, that's the Office of Strategic Services, the intelligence organization, the precursor to the CIA in the United States. Alec says that the OSS team of interrogators was prejudiced against Georges by dealers that hated my grandfather. Yes, those haters with an 8 were just jelly. He believes that Haberstock may have made the story up. Jonathan Petropoulos, a historian at Loyola College in Baltimore, who has studied Haberstock's life, believes he was telling the truth. If anything, he was lying by omission about Decroix, underplaying it, says Petropoulos. The only way to know the true extent of the alleged collaboration would be to examine the contents of the Wildenstein vaults and files. For years, people have speculated that the vaults contain art looted by the Nazis and taken in trade by Decroix. The suspicions are strong, but there is no smoking gun. You can't get their records without a subpoena, and who knows if Georges didn't sanitize the files, says one historian. In fact, the Wildensteins have been caught with works from the Nazi plunder only once, in the 1950s, when they were found to have a set of 15th century enamels that had belonged to Poland's Czartoryski family before the war. The Wildensteins settled with the Czartoryskis. But the current controversy over the Kahn manuscripts has put the art world on alert. Mazerovsky, for one, is interested in the collection of the late Florence Gould, the daughter-in-law of the great robber baron Jay Gould. The collection was created largely by Daniel in the 60s and 70s and sold at auction by Sotheby's in 1985. According to Mazerovsky, The provenance of some of the paintings in the collection is murky, and it is still not clear how they ended up in Wildenstein hands. Wildenstein says Mazurovsky was one of the few dealers in New York at the time that could pull it off, the westward drift of stolen art. According to Willy Korte, a German lawyer who has devoted his life to tracking down artworks looted by the Nazis, pick up any impressionist major artist and read the provenance objectively. You'll find many instances of a great deal of detail until the late 30s or early 40s, and then no names, no dates, even just blanks. And then Wildenstein pops up in the 50s. But Alec is firm that any such charges are absolutely ludicrous. My grandfather was a Jew, he says. There is no reason he would have met anybody in the German army. There is no evidence that Daniel Wildenstein participated in his father's alleged wartime activities. But over the years, Daniel did hear the whispered allegations. Excuse me. He knew, says one friend, that for many years there were prominent French Jewish families, like the Schloss heirs, who would not deal with the Wildensteins because of Georges. But Daniel greeted their contempt with his own. He would say, "People hate us because they are jealous. There you go again, haters with an 8B jelly," recalls one woman. But I think the criticism made him bitter and isolated. Well, he was already isolated, and it seems like he was already bitter as well. Although his grandchildren have been raised as Jews, and although his second wife Sylvia is Israeli, Daniel has been criticized for his reluctance to donate to Jewish charities. Well, that's unusual. He has also baffled friends by his refusal to set foot in Israel. Also weird. Indeed, Jocelyne says she was told by Daniel she could not hold her son's bar mitzvah in Israel because Daniel would not attend. I wonder why. Within the family, friends and former employees say the rumors of Georges' wartime past were never discussed. Even if Daniel knew what happened, says a friend of Alec and Guy's, he would not tell his children. As the rumors began to appear in the press, most notably in a 1991 spy article by Jonathan Napak, and I have that article coming up. The family virtually ignored them, as it does today. There is no reaction, says Jocelyne Wildenstein, because they are so sure of the power they have. They think they are above it. Well, that goes to support the earlier comment where someone said that the deal with the Wildensteins was that they think they're superior to other people. They are above it. These days, Daniel Wildenstein spends most of his time at the family's Paris headquarters, updating his art archives and overseeing the research on more Wildenstein catalog raisonné. Evenings are spent quietly with Sylvia. They had lived together for 14 years before Daniel finally married her, shortly after Alec married Jocelyne in 1978, and just before Guy married Christina Hansson, a Swedish former model. Like Jocelyne, Sylvia grew up without much money, the daughter of Eastern European Jews who had immigrated to Israel. She is widely liked. She's delightful, says one prominent socialite. Her mother used to wear white plastic boots, and Sylvia would laugh and say, "See what money can buy?" She's very funny and very kind, and although she lives this rarefied life, she knows that wealth isn't everything. The rest of them believe it. She keeps a picture of herself holding a machine gun on her side table. She knows. Among the Wildensteins, Sylvia is the one who is most willing to acknowledge that the family is facing serious trouble. Over lunch at Streza, a Paris restaurant where she goes every day to meet friends, she has talked freely about how upset she is about Alec and Jocelyne's divorce, how concerned she is for Daniel, who is diabetic, and how the stress of the scandal is affecting him. As people such as Mazurovsky and Korte begin to focus on the Wildenstein holdings, and as the possibility grows of a divorce trial that could force the family to divulge financial and business documents, Daniel, friends say, seems determined to fight back. If any of his friends or family members disagree with Daniel's behavior these days, they aren't going to tell him. Sylvia, his sons, everyone, says Jocelyne, fears crossing him. He has all the power. And that, more than any of the crises facing the Wildensteins now, may be the biggest threat to the future of the family dynasty. Today, Alec and Guy are often dismissed as lightweights by art dealers and even some collectors. A couple of playboys, one dealer calls them, who happen to inherit the most considerable gallery in the world. Rich boys, says another dealer dismissively, echoing the general impression of Guy, who has become best known for his polo playing, and Alec, best known for his game hunting. They're nepobabies. Nowadays, Guy handles much of the administration of the gallery, and Alec functions as its lead salesman. Friends and former employees say that they do have talent, although evidence of it has been buried under Daniel's domineering presence. It was Alec, for instance, who wooed David Vey, one of the world's greatest art collectors, selling him the long-lost Psyche, among other paintings. And although few people are aware of it, both Alec and Guy have orchestrated major deals, and Alec has authored a catalogue raisonné on the painter Odilon Redon. The boys know their art, they know their clients and their tastes, insists one collector. The problem, friends say, is that they have almost no influence over major decisions. Daniel is the one who sets the prices. He is the one who declares, "This is a Cézanne from this period, and this is what it's worth," says a former employee. "When you see the three of them together," says one man who knows the family, "Daniel does all the talking, and the boys add only elements. I went to see Daniel recently, and Guy was sitting in the office, and he didn't say a word." There are those who believe that the worst thing Daniel has done for the Wildenstein Empire has been to infantilize his sons. "He raised cripples," says one friend of the family's. "Alec is very funny and very smart. If his father had let him go to university, he'd be really running this company. If their father had let them grow normally, they'd be amazing. There wouldn't be this mess if it weren't for Daddy." Well, you also left out that getting him crimed by women in the world's oldest profession. That did some damage. And if you don't believe me, you don't have to take my word for it. You can ask Earl Spencer, the brother of the late Princess Diana. He's written a book about his own pretty awful childhood, and in addition to being sent away to boarding school at an incredibly young age, he was interfered with at a rather young age by females, and he writes about how devastating this was to his psyche, no pun intended, as that was just the name of the painting just mentioned. And if you look at his troubled personal life, his multiple marriages, his current wife, ex-wife, I think the divorce has finally gone through from his last wife, has recently been in the tabloids complaining about the fact that he cheated on her with his current girlfriend, which is not a difficult thing to believe. Lord Spencer is not known for his fidelity. So possibly that kind of behavior, I would say, causes problems for the psyches of the young men who then or boys who then grow up to be young men and older men. And then, well, here you go. Look at Alec. And look at if you haven't caught up, if you haven't listened to part one, go listen to part one, and that gives a little bit more explanation as to the personal difficulties that Alec ran into with what Daddy taught him at too young of an age. Oh, I suppose daddy teaching you those kinds of things there's never a good age for that, but I think you know what I mean. So, continuing. Jocelyne says that Danielle's control has weighed heavily on Alec. I think at a certain point he was getting depressed, she says. Alec is the one who really deals with the racehorses, but everything goes to his father. Nothing comes to him. Gee, it just occurred to me that rather sounds like a Hunter Biden kind of thing. Alec deals with the racehorses, but everything goes to his father. His father's what did they call him? Mr. Big? Not the number one guy. What was that term that Hunter Biden allegedly used for Joe? The big guy? I think it was the big guy. Yeah. And again, look at what Hunter ended up. Look at his personal life. Look at his extracurricular activities. Rather similar. It seems like this is a thing, a repeating thing. Okay, continuing. He is the one who bought one day Alec France as a foal in America, the best horse ever seen in France. Some in the art world believe that the Wildensteins have lost their aggressiveness as Danielle has aged, but has refused to let go. Their power today in certain ways is more latent than active, says one dealer. If they wanted, they could use it to dominate the business, but this generation is not as aggressive as the preceding ones. To a certain extent, factors beyond the Wildensteins' control have affected the way they do business. The growing dominance of the auction houses over the market, and the increasing amount of art held by the world's museums, which diminishes the supply available to dealers. Well, some people have come up with a solution to that. They just have people forge the art, and they pretend that it's real. Movie of the week, thank you. It was The Big Guy. Yes, The Big Guy. Okay, continuing. But the Wildensteins, people say, have also been strangely passive in recent years and stuck in the ways of the past. A lot of people think that the behavior of the Wildensteins is due to sneakiness, but I think it has a lot to do with incompetence, says one man who has done business with the gallery. And I would say, why not both? It is a very old-fashioned firm in its arrogance and in its approach to business. It has long been Danielle's dream, friends say, to be remembered not so much as an art dealer, but as a great art historian, as the man who financed valuable research into art and whose own work made him an authority on artists such as Monet and Manet. I'm not involved in the galleries. I'm only interested in books and art history. I think he was interested in one or two other things, but okay. He said when his final volume on Monet was published in 1992. That his dream could be about to go up in smoke, that the empire his family worked so hard to build might be about to crumble, does not seem to have occurred to Danielle. The publicity, the scandal, says his friend, André Benlassine, a businessman and financier. He doesn't care. Well, he probably should have. He probably should have. And it does say here at the bottom, the magazine published a postscript to this article in the October 2008 issue, and that is true. But since we are going to go through so many articles between this article that we have just read, which, if I remember correctly, is from 1998, or yes, March 1998, Bitter Spoils from Vanity Fair. And again, this is Jocelyne from that time period and Alec Sr. from that time period. I don't think it would even, there's no point in reading that follow-up right now because it would be jumping too far ahead in time, but everything contained in that update we're going to cover by reading articles that will be published between the publication of this article, 1998, and that when that update was published, which is 2008. So now I have been streaming. We've been here for almost 2 hours. It is time for me to refresh my cup of tea and take a little stretch. I would advise you, if you've been sitting or for any period of time, to do the same. And if you've come in late on the stream, you could always scrub back and listen from the beginning to catch up. I am going to take a break of about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, and then come back. And when we come back, we are going to take a look at one, possibly two. It depends on how quickly I can get through this New York Times article. But what we will be coming back to is this article from September 1997 that was published on the day that Alec Wildenstein Sr. was released from prison, about the family's past and the Nazi art loot. And if there is more time, yeah, okay, I think that's good to start off with. Then we will go further back in time, or maybe we should go with the spy article first. Maybe we'll do the spy article first. The article from Spy Magazine, October 1991, which actually precedes all of this other nonsense, the divorce, Jocelyne, and all of this stuff. This is actually the earliest article that we've encountered thus far from 1991, the Wildenstein family. And it being spy, it's always entertaining. So I'll decide when I come back which of the two of these we will read first. And yes, if there's time, we will do both. If there isn't enough time, I will just read the one. But I think we might be able to get through both when we come back. But I'm going to go on a little bit of a break right now. This is French Dip Empire. I am the Empress, and we are in the middle of our second part of our Remembering the Catwoman, Jocelyne Wildenstein stream, the second in a series, an ongoing series on the Wildenstein family. So I am going to take my break now and be back in just a little bit.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to French Dip Empire. I am the Empress, and we are continuing our stream on Jocelyne Wildenstein, Remembering the Catwoman. This is part 2 of our in memoriam segment, as it were, of the infamous Jocelyne Wildenstein. There she is, the Bride of Wildenstein, the Catwoman herself. Now, where we are in our discussion, we were about to embark on reading one of 2 articles. I had not decided, so I think we're going to go with the Spy Magazine article from 1991, because Spy Magazine was such a great publication, and the article is bound to be a good time. And if there's time, we will continue and read that other New York Times article. Both of these articles that I'm about to read, this Spy Magazine article from 1991, and then this New York Times article from 1997, were mentioned in the Vanity Fair article, Bitter Spoils, from 1998, which we read in the beginning of this show. And so let's continue. Here's a piece of artwork that they commissioned for the article in Spy. And here is the article. Here we go. So this is from 1991. To reiterate, this precedes in time the Alec Jocelyne breakup, divorce, and scandal. And 1 second. Thank you. And so this is perhaps the first published criticism of the family, which was notoriously publicity shy and scandal averse until Jocelyne came along. And we can't exactly blame her, because she was just trying to live her life and continue in her marriage. And her husband, Alec, decided that he wanted to see other people, and he embarked on that, whether Jocelyne liked it or not. And lo and behold, a lot of dark secrets, a lot of nasty Nazi skeletons came falling out of the Wildenstein family closets. And as we proceed with this series on Jocelyne and the rest of the Wildenstein family, we're going to see how the art, we're going to see it's sort of two tracks. On the one hand, there's Alec and Jocelyne and their personal lives, and then on the other track, there is the Wildenstein family and their art gallery and their art dealing business and what happened there. So right now, we're focusing more on what happened with the art, and this type is tiny, so I will blow it up in case if you want to read along, you can. So it says, they're creepy and they're kooky, mysterious and spooky. They inherited a vastly wealthy and powerful art gallery that secretly sold paintings to Hitler and Goering and other Nazis during the war. They're altogether ooky. They're the Wildenstein family. The secret lives of the dealers who run the masterpiece market. So I'm blowing that up a little bit. There we go. If you walk down Upper Fifth Avenue on one of those perfect iris blue October afternoons when Manhattan is at its best, on a day when the air has that glassy autumn coolness and clarity, and the sidewalks are as golden as wheat in the slightly muted autumn sun. Was someone an English major in college? Creative writing, perhaps? On a day, although I can see it and I can feel it. On a day when the new season for opera, parties, fashion, and everything else has quickened, and your fellow pedestrians seem like the best-looking, best-dressed people anywhere, you will pass the Metropolitan Museum of Art and 12 blocks south, the small, flawless Frick collection. Maybe you will stop in one or both museums to look at a Rembrandt or a Poussin or a Boucher, and you will think that New York is a wonderful place. Probably you won't be thinking about Hermann Goering. You probably won't be thinking about French Jews who collaborated with the Nazis and may have profited by selling the Germans exquisite paintings by the likes of Rembrandt, Poussin, and Boucher. You won't be thinking about the ironies of 20th century civilization with its weird mix of butchery and enlightenment. Actually, as you leave the delirious Boucher room at the Frick and walk alongside Central Park with its arched trees that meet the avenue like a reddish cresting wave, you will be thinking that on this afternoon, 20th century civilization is giving a pretty darn good account of itself. If you continue walking for about 5 minutes and take a few steps off 5th down 64th Street, you will come to Wildenstein and Company, founded in Paris in 1875 and headquartered in New York since World War II, with other branches in London, Tokyo, and Buenos Aires. It is by far the richest and most powerful art dealer in the world. The vault beneath the gallery stores thousands of pieces worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At one time, the inventory included 400 Italian primitives, 2 Botticellis, 8 paintings each by Rembrandt and Rubens, 3 Velázquez's, 9 El Grecos, 5 Tintorettos, 79 Fragonards, and 7 Watteaus, and a partridge in a pear tree. As a rule, the gallery never holds fewer than 10 Cézannes, 20 Renoirs, 15 Pissarros, 10 Van Goghs, 10 Gauguins, 10 Corrots, 25 Courbets. The inventory represents one of the greatest collections of art in the world. Private
or public. When museums wish to buy or bid on an old master, they almost inevitably turn to the Wildensteins. Altogether, the Wildenstein family's wealth is probably about $5 billion. It has interests in racehorses, Japan's Seibu department stores, a huge company that invests heavily in art, and real estate, including a fiefdom in Kenya protected by armed guards. The family itself, which includes the current patriarch, Mr. Daniel, as he is known. I thought it was Monsieur Daniel, but Mr. Daniel, I guess we'll call him for this article, and his two sons, Mr. Alec and Mr. Guy, is extremely proud. Prince Charles is the godfather of one of Mr. Guy's sons. That must be David, because the other children are his other children are daughters. It is also secretive, feudal, and eccentric. The staff may be minding Titians one moment and diapering pet monkeys the next. Ah, yes, Jocelyne's capuchin monkey, May Moon, who we have learned lived in a glass enclosure above her bathtub in the New York townhouse. I'm not making this up. It was in the articles, I swear. As a class, art dealers aren't exactly known for their fine scruples. Constant exposure. It seems like any time you're called a dealer in any kind, it's not like the nicest thing. Like a car dealer. You don't refer to, if you want to insult someone, you might say that they come across like a used car dealer, right? It just seems like the term dealer. Like if you're broker, perhaps, is a nicer way if you're brokering things, or salesperson. But anytime you use the term dealer, it usually indicates some kind of like shady or less than savory behavior. I don't know why that is. If you can think of an example that proves me wrong, I'd love to hear it. Movie of the week in the chat says, we remember the monkey. Hey, movie of the week in the chat, if you could tell me, when I just laughed, did that get too loud in your ears? Because I'm trying to keep an eye on my volume levels, and I don't want to blow any ears out by being too loud. Okay. Continuing the article. Constant exposure to beautiful objects, it turns out, does nothing for the soul. The Wildensteins, however, have a particularly gruesome chapter in their past that probably befits art dealers of their prominence. According to recently declassified OSS documents obtained by Spy, Georges Wildenstein, the son of the gallery's founder and Mr. Daniel's father, met secretly with one Karl Haberstock at the Hôtel du Roi René in Aix-en-Provence in November 1940. And I will go back and we can take a look at the images here that accompany the article. This is a picture of Daniel and Guy and Alec, obviously rather old, at the racetrack. And then this is a picture of Daniel's second wife, Sylvia, with her odd helmet wig, whatever that is. And their nasty little caption says, Sylvia, Mr. Daniel's second wife, awarded the Prix de Scary Frenchwoman, because she's holding this sort of silver cup thing, and they're claiming that she won the Scary Frenchwoman Award, which presumably could stay in the family because Jocelyne got even scarier than Sylvia. She outdid her stepmother, or stepmother-in-law, I should say. Or is it mother-in-law if it's a step? Do you just say mother-in-law because it doesn't matter at that point, the step thing? Well, anyway, that doesn't matter. Okay, in November 1940, when the Germans were overrunning France a few months earlier, Mr. Georges had placed 302 of his best pieces on a ship bound for America and fled to the Midi, in the unoccupied zone. Alas, a German U-boat intercepted the Wildenstein's cargo and forced it into a port in Bordeaux. Haberstock was a Berlin art dealer who had been loudly anti-Semitic in the 1920s. He was the most prominent dealer in Germany and had worked closely with the Wildensteins before the war. He had come to Paris as Hitler's personal agent to acquire works for the new museum in Linz, Hitler's pet project. Over the course of 4 days of negotiations in Aix, the Jew and the Nazi made a deal. The German policy toward Jewish-owned art, all art in fact, was neither consistent nor very comprehensible during the occupation. At times, the Nazis would simply confiscate paintings. At other times, they'd arrange complicated, pseudo-legal, forced sales. And sometimes they'd make legitimate purchases, often with confiscated money. In the case of the Wildenstein collection, the 302 pieces on board the boat had been seized by the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, and taken to Paris. Another 87 pieces in storage in the country at the Chateau de Sourches were to be seized by the ERR at any moment. An elite group under the command of anti-Semitic dreamer Alfred Rosenberg, the ERR was charged with collecting materials for a future academy where the young would be indoctrinated in anti-Semitism, anti-Masonry, and so on. Much to Rosenberg's frustration, the ERR was often manipulated by Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, who used it as a pretext to seize Jewish-owned art for his personal collection. Göring also sometimes put his own desires before even Hitler's, taking paintings that were earmarked for the Führer. In Haberstock, working primarily for Hitler, Göring working primarily for himself, and the ERR working solely for its ideals. George Wildenstein was lucky enough to have 3 sets of Nazis vying for his collection. Given the legal murk of France in 1940, this gave him some bargaining power. Art historian Douglas Cooper wrote the newly declassified Wildenstein et Compagnie report for the OSS, again, the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. In August 1945, Cooper was not a callow academic. He'd had long experience interrogating German prisoners in North Africa. The report was in part the product of intensive interrogations of Haberstock and describes the meetings at Aix in detail. According to Haberstock, Mr. Georges was very eager to do business. He first proposed to exchange a large Tiepolo and unspecified other pieces for, presumably confiscated, Impressionist paintings. He knew that the Nazis considered such paintings entartete Kunst, degenerate art, and would part with them painlessly. As Cooper's report has it, the Tiepolo was said to be unsaleable in the USA, whereas the Impressionists would bring a high price. For reasons Cooper does not state, it was impossible to carry out this trade. Haberstock claimed that Mr. Georges then tried to persuade him to release the Wildenstein collection to the third man present at these negotiations, Roger Decroix. Decroix had recently returned from working for Georges Wildenstein in New York and was an old friend of Haberstock's. They had traveled to Provence together to meet with Mr. Georges, having first met with the director of the planned museum in Linz, who was visiting Paris. Decroix would carry on the business of the gallery, always giving Haberstock the first chance to buy a work. Mr. Georges proposed. This Haberstock accepted. In Haberstock's presence, Mr. Georges gave Decroix full authority to manage the collection, to sell anything to the Germans, and to make it his business to discover important collections the Germans would be interested in acquiring. According to Cooper, both parties were satisfied by the negotiations. Mr. Georges made his way to Portugal and set sail for New York, which now became his base. On their return to Paris, his 2 Nazi partners decided to use Haberstock's influence to Aryanize the gallery. The Nazis frowned on this practice, whereby Jewish businesses were transferred to non-Jewish ownership, and thus protected from confiscation. But, with Germanic consistency, they respected such a transfer once it had taken place. The ERR was furious when it learned the Wildenstein collection had been Aryanized, and a member immediately telephoned to Goering in Berlin. The Reichsmarschall simply said that if the gallery had been Aryanized, the ERR's right to Jewish property was superseded, and the works now belonged to the new owner. After all, grotesque genocidal regulations are grotesque genocidal regulations. Having won for Hitler first choice of the collection, Haberstock personally informed Goering that he would be offered everything which was not wanted by the Fuhrer. During the occupation, Decaux sold in fairly large quantities to most German dealers and museums. Art historian Theodore Rousseau Jr. describes him in his Goering report, also prepared for the OSS, as probably the worst of the collaborators among the dealers. Particularly eerie were those words about discovering important collections. Who knows what vulnerable collectors Decaux led the Germans to, using the Wildensteins' vast files and archives? We can say that in April 1942, he engineered the sale of two major Rembrandts, the Portrait of Titus and Landscape with Castle, to Haberstock from Etienne Nicolas, a Paris wine merchant. In August 1942, Decaux attempted to buy the enormous collection of a Jewish family named Schloss for Haberstock. He lost the collection to another dealer, but the Schloss collection was sold to Hitler for the museum in Linz around the time Decaux visited the family. This was the second most significant acquisition that Hitler made, and although legally a purchase, the sale was forced, the payment a sham. The Schloss family received nothing for their paintings. Decaux sold Haberstock paintings by Laurent, Poussin, Boucher, Courbet, and others for the Linz Museum. He sold an entire ceiling painted by Boucher to Goering's personal art advisor. He smuggled paintings directly to Goering through a Swiss dealer, and he even allowed the Germans to use the Wildenstein premises as a transshipment point for looted art. Exchanges involving modern pictures were highly profitable. Although Goering liked some moderns, he had a soft spot for Van Gogh. Nazi ideology demanded that they be discarded. He therefore often paid dealers with modern pictures in lieu of cash. And the image here that is illustrating the article, this is Danielle Wildenstein in, I wonder if this is, I guess it's, well, I don't know what room this is, but it's one of the places on 64th Street, I imagine, either the home or the gallery, but I can't tell just from this photo. Okay. Continuing. Since it is unclear how Georges communicated with him during the war, it would seem Roger Decaux was the real collaborator. Haberstock, however, told his interrogator that the considerable profits accrued during the occupation were deposited in a special account at Georges Wildenstein's disposal after the war. Even as Haberstock and Cooper spoke in 1945, and as Mr. Georges sat on 64th Street, Haberstock and Mr. Georges were technically in business together. Haberstock told Cooper that he and Georges Wildenstein had half interests in a Pizarro and that Wildenstein was holding the painting in New York. Douglas Cooper says that once the gallery was established under his name, Decaux set to work to carry out the rest of his chief's wishes. Decaux' chief was Georges Wildenstein. We must ask then, what were the profits Haberstock says Decaux kept in an account for Georges Wildenstein? which Cézannes or Pissarros or other degenerate paintings obtained through Decroix's efforts, if any, went into Wildenstein's vaults after the war? Given the position of Jews in France in 1940, would it be possible to say that Georges was a victim? What would have been the condition of the business if a faithful caretaker had not tended to it? What would be the condition of the family's wealth today? And let's take a look at these illustrations. So here is Danielle. It says, searching the vault, although we don't know which of the apparently many vaults, presumably one of the rooms in the vault under the 64th Street Gallery. And look at all those paintings. Okay. And then Caravaggio's Lute Player. Note beautiful still life. Also, it's worth $12 million. Okay. All right. Continuing, the Wildensteins have never acknowledged that while others lost everything, Georges made a bargain with the Germans that allowed them to prosper. Maybe this is why they don't donate to Jewish charities and don't like to go to Israel, because they're afraid of getting yelled at by their fellow Jews. People coming up and grabbing them and demanding their family's artwork back. Okay. When an ex-employee using the pseudonym Frank MacDonald wrote a novel, I have to get a copy of this, called Provenance in 1979. Let's see, Frank MacDonald. That was clearly based on the Wildensteins and alluded heavily to their activities during the war. They made no public response. Smart move. The family may also have been the inspiration for Joseph Losey's Mr. Klein. Oh, another one to put on the reading list. They denied Spy's request for an interview. And why should they address their past? After all, until now, the only public version of their story was a small footnote in the files of the UN War Crimes Commission. Quote, the Nazis transferred the Wildenstein collection in May 1941 from the Chateau de Sourches to Germany. Furthermore, Georges Wildenstein discussed the gallery's dealings with the Nazis in a 1943 article he wrote for a pro-Free French journal on whose editorial board he served that was printed in New York during the war. Quote, as for the paintings which belong to me, stored for safekeeping in the castle of Sourches, as well as my property of Seine-et-Oise, a Wildenstein residence, they were seized nearly simultaneously, and this did not fail to be followed by all the usual procedures to make the seizure appear like an outright sale. End quote. According to this account, Georges Wildenstein suffered the same fate scores of others did, confiscation and sometimes mock sales to satisfy Germanic legalism. Unfortunately, after hiding behind a footnote all these years, the Wildensteins must now confront the report of a thorough investigation aimed directly at Mr. Georges' wartime dealings. After examining files, letters, receipts, and other documents, and questioning Haberstock closely, Cooper concluded that the paintings at the Chateau de Sourches were not seized and treated in the usual fashion. They were returned to Paris under an agreement to which Mr. Georges himself was a party, and one that would ultimately benefit him. After describing the fate of his own paintings, Mr. Georges bitterly condemns certain practices that will be familiar to those who have read the OSS reports on Wildenstein et compagnie, and one is tempted to treat his outburst almost as an inverted confession. Quote, certain obliging dealers, more voracious than collaborationists, together with German and Italian dealers who rushed to Paris to purchase all that they could find, did their shameful deeds in the same manner there where legal theft could not be freely accomplished. They purchased for Hitler and for his museum in Linz, for Hermann Goering, for all Germans and all collaborationists whose purchasing lust rose the more their confidence in a Nazi victory fell. It's sort of like If I Did It by George Wildenstein, no? Remember the book that OJ wrote? Haven't we heard all this before? Perhaps this passage is not the work of Mr. George's guilt-ridden unconscious, but merely a case of unsurpassable hypocrisy. In any event, no one could have more eloquently expressed disgust at the actions of galleries like Mr. George's than Mr. George himself. Were it not for anti-Semitism, the Wildensteins wouldn't be named Wildenstein. When Napoleon ordered that all the Jews in Alsace adopt Christian surnames, one family took the name Wildenstein from its village. In the 1870s, Nathan Wildenstein sold draperies in the provinces, but by the turn of the century, he had founded the gallery in Paris and become one of the great international art dealers. On his death in 1934, Nathan left the business to his son, Mr. Georges. Mr. Georges died in 1963, leaving the gallery to his son, Daniel, now 74. Since the war, the family has continued to operate in a grand style, tinged with menace. More recently, however, their occasionally farcical behavior has resembled that of another rich, somewhat perverse family, the Adamses. Augmenting our sense of this eerie likeness, of course, is the fact that the Wildensteins' townhouse is just like a museum. The Louis XVI townhouse on 64th Street was built for the Wildensteins in 1932 by Horace Trumbauer. The entryway has 30-foot ceilings. French portraits stare solemnly. A tapestry after Boucher hangs over the grand staircase. An impressive marble floral arrangement sits on a marble table. An impressive floral arrangement. I think I said marble floral arrangement. Sorry. Vladimir Visson, the former director of exhibitions, once compared the gallery to a... pretentious Italian funeral parlor. Okay, and let's take a moment to enjoy the photographs. It says here, top, a typical afternoon at the French country place. So there's the house and some horses and a helicopter. Above left, the swimming pool at Chantilly. Note, how about some backstroke? Okay, there's the pool. A little hard to see there. And après polo with... there's Guy, obviously the very small one, Prince Charles, now King Charles of the UK, and the late Princess Diana. Okay. All right, continuing the article. The silken atmosphere may sometimes suffer a tear. One salesman was showing Franz Hals's Laughing Cavalier, worth at least $750,000, to a client, remembers a former Wildenstein employee. The stockboy brought the painting up from the vault and set it on the easel. As the salesman started to gesticulate wildly about the glories of Franz Hals, the painting started to tip forward. The stockboy lunged, but he was too late. The painting had tumbled to the floor. Another time, a stockboy put his foot through a Van Gogh. Regardless of such mishaps, the setting has its intended effect on customers. As Visson said, they come, they look, they pay. The family lives at number 11, a luxurious townhouse next door to the gallery. The adults have separate apartments. The rest of the house is held in common. The children of both Mr. Alec and Mr. Guy live together on the top floor. There is a game room commemorating Kenyan adventures with stuffed kills. Down below ground, there is a large swimming pool. You can smell the chlorine in the gallery's basement, says one Wildenstein worker. The pool has inlaid mosaics of sea animals and is lined with tanks of tropical fish. That seems a little weird. I mean, I like the mosaics, but the tropical fish tanks just seem strange. Alas, the family no longer seems to keep pet monkeys, but they have, well, it's good news for the monkeys, I would think. But they have more recently maintained some sort of wild cat. It looked like a small tiger, says a former associate. It was too big to be any kind of domestic cat, about the size of a medium-sized dog. They had to carry it around for some reason. What do we suppose that was? Personal relations fit into a strict feudal hierarchy, though Mr. Guy is effectively the gallery's manager, since his rumpled older brother prefers the racetrack to running the business. He suffers in the regime. While Mr. Alec has his own office, Mr. Guy is allotted only a small desk in the corner of Mr. Daniel's office. Oh, that's humiliating. Even the antique brass coat hooks in the coat room are embossed with the Wildenstein's initials in order of seniority. With their staff, the Wildensteins alternate between paternalism and cruelty. In the old world fashion, Mr. Daniel, paying a visit to the packing room, once noticed writing on some boxes. "Who has such beautiful handwriting?" he exclaimed. "Give that man a raise immediately." Members of the staff receive shirt money for dry cleaning and one suit ritually purchased every year at Brooks Brothers. But retribution can be swift. An elevator man was promptly sacked after asking Sylvester Stallone for an autograph. Oh yes, you should never do that. That's not right. Oh, Movie of the Week in the chat thinks that the kitty was an ocelot. Okay, well, that's a good guess. And my question to you, Movie of the Week, is do you think that they had to carry the poor thing around because having it run around would be a problem? Because the floors are probably all marble and nice wood that you would not want. Well, I don't know if they would care about the damage. And one doesn't know if they would have had the poor thing declawed. So why do you suppose they would carry it around? Ocelots, they don't want it to run, get up to top speed and slam into something? Well, I guess it couldn't get top speed as big as that place is. I'm sure it's not big enough for an ocelot to have a clear run to get to top speed. Well, anyway, that's one to ponder. Okay. Also, the family sometimes displays a princely arbitrariness in its demands. Mr. Alec simply announced one day that all prices must be raised 10%. When he took his son on a fishing trip once, he returned to the gallery with dozens of bluefish and ordered the men downstairs to gut and clean them. Ugh, that's rude and disgusting. The smell and it's gross, but that's not their training. Movie of the Week in the chat says, yeah, I assume because it's wild, you can't just let it run around. It would probably go to the bathroom too. It would definitely go to the bathroom. I imagine it would chew on furniture and strop on things, scratch its claws on things as well. But I mean, but carrying it around, I mean, unless you kept it in a cage, it would have to exercise. It would have to move. It would have to walk around to a certain extent, would it not? You would need a potty for it. Can you litter box train an ocelot? That is not a question that anyone should ask. Okay. And they let the chow dog pee all over everything, but that was Georges, was it not? I suppose Danielle, Alec, and etc. would not allow their ocelot to make all over their townhouse. But anyway, okay, where did I leave off? Here we go. As for the salesmen, they tend to be old-fashioned characters rather than art-world technocrats. Former President Louis Goldenberg memorized which years of Monet, for example, were good, says an ex-colleague. This style worked quite well with some people. Two of the current salesmen started in the packing room, poor Italian immigrants. When one of them works on a customer in the viewing room, the client probably assumes his salesman is an Italian count. If, with their love of luxury, their animals, and their underlings, the Wildensteins remind one of a Bond villain, their globe-encircling intrigues also recall the machinations of some arch foe set to take over the world. Because secrecy is so important to them, the Wildensteins keep a private transportation service with a truck and planes. The gallery also has an extensive intelligence network. In France, for example, the position of notaire, literally notary, but more like a small-town clerk in the U.S., is passed down from father to son in many towns and villages. The notaires take care of birth certificates, wills, deaths, and the like. In other words, they're in an ideal position to know everything that happens in a small town. Some of them have relationships with the Wildensteins dating back generations. If a notaire learns Madame X owns a certain painting, he informs the Wildensteins, who duly note it in their files. They may send a dealer to buy it without using the Wildenstein name. I guess they get a cheaper price if they're not announcing that they are Wildensteins. That would be my guess. Failing that, when Madame X dies, the local notaire will be among the first to know, and a Wildenstein agent will appear before anyone else even learns of the painting's existence. Madame X's family will certainly welcome a chance to raise cash to pay her inheritance taxes. In the most public post-war scandal that involved the family, the Wildensteins were accused in 1955 of bugging the phone of a competitor, M. Knoedler and Company. A Wildenstein employee admitted to paying a private investigator to do just this. The employee was another interesting character, J. Rusuk, the dealer who Mary McCarthy portrayed in her 1942 story, Rogues Gallery. The gallery settled the suit brought by Knoedler out of court. While not necessarily dishonorable, the gallery's dealings with the Metropolitan Museum of Art have often been, complicated. As the registrar at the museum once said, there was always something cooking with Wildenstein. In the 50s, the Wildensteins sold the museum a Georges de la Tour that was exported from France under controversial circumstances. Another strange case began in November 1970 when the Wildensteins purchased Juan de Pareja by Velázquez at auction. The price was the most ever paid for a painting, $5.5 million. Afterwards, that seems so tiny nowadays. Afterward, Mr. Alec declared that the painting was not for sale. It's a painting my great-grandfather Nathan wanted 80 years ago. Indeed, Mr. Georges had gone every year to petition the 7th Earl of Radnor to sell the painting. A vicious anti-Semite, the Earl would keep Mr. Georges waiting in the anteroom, refusing to see him. Ooh, that is rude. One time, the butler returned with Mr. Georges' personal check in shreds on a silver platter. However, a few months after the purchase, Thomas Hoving, the Met's director, and C. Douglas Dillon, its president, disclosed that the painting had been bought on behalf of the museum. Hoving told Spy that Louis Goldenberg had mistakenly agreed to buy the painting for the Met, while Mr. Daniel wanted it for the gallery. Hoving and Mr. Daniel worked out a bidding system whereby either the gallery or the museum could top a bid, depending on where other bidders pushed the price. If the resulting price of $5.5 million required that the painting go to the museum, however, it is still a mystery why Mr. Alec announced that the gallery would never let the painting out of its hands. More recently, the Wildensteins were involved in another convoluted affair with the Met. In 1989, the gallery reached a tentative agreement with the Met to sell the museum a painting from the School of Caravaggio for $300,000. The Met sent the painting, then assumed to be a copy of the Lute Player, which I think we saw above. Up here. Right there. Okay. The Lute Player. Where did I leave off? Which is currently in the Hermitage. To Sir Dennis Mahon of Sotheby's for a look. Mahon, the leading expert on early 17th century Italian art, promptly pronounced this painting an authentic Caravaggio. The Wildensteins, obviously delighted, generously increased their price to $12 million, which the Met refused to pay. They then offered to sell it to New York Times publisher and Met director Punch Sulzberger at a $4 million discount if he'd agree to leave it to the museum in his will. Sulzberger declined, so, in the end, the Wildensteins lent the painting indefinitely to the Met. Meanwhile, after asking Mann how he could express his thanks, Mr. Daniel donated $250,000 on Mahon's behalf to the National Gallery in London for the restoration of 2 cartoons by Agostino and Annibale Carracci. With the Wildensteins, nothing is ever simple. The gift to the National Gallery raises a sticky question about the Wildensteins. Given the potential for abuse of their position, what power does their commercial gallery hold over scholarship? Hypothetically, a gallery seeking higher prices for its wares could pay off art historians who attributed questionable paintings to a master rather than to his pupils or imitators. Bernard Berenson's reputation was ruined by evidence he had accepted just this kind of bribe. No art historian could authenticate outright fakes and retain the respect of his profession, but attribution of plausible works ultimately rests on a scholar's judgment. Others may disagree, but attributions can always be defended. In addition to money, the Wildensteins have their archives to entice or punish art historians. Their holdings easily compare with those of many national libraries, and scholars fear losing access to such a resource. Finally, the family owns La Gazette des Beaux-Arts, France's most prestigious and oldest scholarly art journal, and Arts, a weekly newspaper. What is truly extraordinary about the Wildensteins' position, however, is that in many cases, they don't need anyone else to authenticate paintings. They have already done so themselves. And then this is Alec Wildenstein Sr. A catalogue raisonné is an exhaustive, annotated listing of an artist's complete works. It includes a detailed provenance for each piece, and buyers regard the catalogue raisonné as the final word on a painting's origins. How convenient for a gallery selling paintings, then, that the catalogue raisonné on Chardin, Ingres, and Fragonard, among others, were written by the son of its founder, and that the catalogue raisonné for Monet and 2 volumes on Manet were written by his grandson. Although some admire his Monet scholarship, Daniel Wildenstein is said to rely heavily on assistants. I can believe that. An elderly European collector says, Daniel Wildenstein couldn't write a postcard. When Spy told a prominent art historian that Daniel Wildenstein listed his occupation in Who's Who in France as historien d'art, or art historian, he grimaced and muttered, "That's disgusting." The case of Mr. Georges Gauguin catalogue raisonné is a vivid example of an attempt by the Wildensteins to control the process by which works are approved or discarded. On August 19, 1965, a withering attack on the catalogue appeared in the Times Literary Supplement. It was written by none other than Karl Haberstock's interrogator, Douglas Cooper. In his review, Cooper writes, "Pedigrees and quotations have been juggled to suit private needs, and Gauguin's oeuvre has been shorn of some authentic works and adulterated with others that do not belong." Private needs? Later in his review, Cooper asks the appropriate rhetorical question: is a dealer capable of the scientific detachment necessary to enable him to judge things impartially? This, among other things, prompted the Wildensteins to sue Cooper, but eventually the two sides reached a settlement. The Wildensteins would pay Cooper to rewrite the Gauguin Catalogue Raisonné himself. This would prove to occupy the rest of his life. When he died in 1984, he'd left the Catalogue Raisonné unfinished, and the manuscripts remained in the possession of the Fondation Wildenstein in Paris. The Wildensteins claimed that the work was far from completed. A young woman is apparently working on the project. The lacunae I found, remarked one who has seen the work, indicated to me that they found something in Cooper's manuscript deeply problematic. More than 7 years after his death, there is no indication that Cooper's Gauguin Catalogue Raisonné will emerge anytime soon. For all their wealth and influence, the Wildensteins' future contains some clouds. Well, there would be a lot more coming in the future years, as we have been finding out. What has damaged the gallery more than the rise of the auction houses, Sotheby's and Christie's, is the gradual loss of artworks to museums. Formerly, collectors established long-term relationships with their dealers. When a collector died or his taste changed, the paintings were often returned to the original dealer. Dealers thereby replenished their stock. One, Toulouse-Lautrec, of a dancer, was owned 5 times by the Wildensteins between 1923 and 1955, rising in price from $1,800 to $275,000. The gallery currently does half its business with museums, and when a painting is sold to a museum, it passes permanently from the market. They will wipe us dealers out by buying everything, Mr. Daniel told Art News, and there will be no way to replace what they buy. The quality of the family members may be deteriorating along with the business environment. Ho ho, very true. Mr. Georges very early on recognized the value of the post-impressionists. Mr. Daniel declares, "I am a great admirer of Andrew Wyeth. He says his eye is on Argentina, Australia, and Japan as new sources of art. He devotes a great deal of attention to the family stables in Chantilly, where the horses enjoy a heated swimming pool, among other amenities. According to Town and Country, at no time does his voice throb with more emotion than when he speaks of his greatest dream. I want to win the Kentucky Derby." Everyone always hopes that the next generation will be better, but they end up regretting the passing generation, says an elderly European collector. As Mr. Daniel ages, his sons prepare to take over. Mr. Alec and Mr. Guy roam the world in a fleet of jets, each with the Wildenstein insignia, a horseshoe, painted on the tail. Mr. Guy spends his time on his Caribbean island when he isn't in Florida, playing polo with Prince Charles. Mr. Alec has his land in Kenya, and there the family entertains swells from the art world and beyond. Each night is devoted to a different theme. For example, Thursday night might be Tiger Night, and everything down to the salt shakers will be decorated in a tiger motif. Mr. Alec once enjoyed hunting in Kenya by helicopter and would play videos of his kills as he cruised around Manhattan in a limousine. That's weird. I mean, he has a home. He doesn't need to tool around in a car watching videos. It also sounds like American Psycho, but I guess in this case it would be Franco-American Psycho because he's French. But that sounds really, really either socio or psychopathic, depending on how you want to split the hairs of the different definitions of those terms. But that sounds, almost like a cut scene, a deleted scene from the director's edition or something of American Psycho. That's really weird and disturbing. Okay. I think art dealers are an endangered species. Well, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. This article has convinced me. Mr. Daniel remarked in 1978, in my grandfather's time, there were probably 20 really top painting dealers. Even in 1939, there were still perhaps a dozen. Now we are standing like a dinosaur, and I don't think it is very healthy to be left alone. Standing alone with a few $1 billion worth of art is not a position many would find worrisome. And Mr. Daniel does have reason to be optimistic. The auction houses have come down in the world, and the opening of the virtually bankrupt Soviet Union, wow, that's how old this article is, should bring to market hundreds of lost old masters and impressionists. No one is in a better position to exploit this new supply than the Wildensteins, and they should be capable of maintaining their position for some time. Still, if things keep going as they have, if that elderly European collector is right, the Wildensteins may not have many generations left. And movie of the week in the chat says, Franco-American Psycho, lol. Makes me think bad things about SpaghettiOs. Hey, let's not say anything good. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. Well, maybe that was a clue that not all was right. SpaghettiOs are Franco-American? Not Chef Boyardee? I can't remember. I started then thinking they were Chef Boyardee, but I really honestly can't remember the last time SpaghettiOs are Franco-American? I feel like I need to look this up now. It's a rather trivial thing, but little trivial things will bug me. I'm looking this up. I need to know which brand SpaghettiOs actually is. Okay. Canned pasta. It is Campbell's. Under the Franco-American brand. Okay, there you go. Good on you, movie of the week. Spaghetti amoeba. Do they even sell that any longer? Is that still a thing? I have no idea. Okay, well, enough about cheap canned pasta. There was a little sidebar on this article, so let's take a look at that. And okay, it says, when people come to see 'em, continuing with the Addams Family, movie of the week in the chat, told ya, with the little hot dog bits. Yes, with the little hot dog bits. Okay, all right, so let's read the sidebar. Where are we? Okay, when people come to see him, a visit to Wildenstein and Company. At 10 o'clock one bright morning, 2 spy employees arrive at Wildenstein and Company for a viewing appointment. They hope to be brought to the famous 3rd floor before they are discovered as posers, and at the recommendation of experts, they have prepared by reading up on the Barbizon School, the French landscape painters of the mid-1800s. Previously, the word Barbizon connoted to one of the pair only a women's hotel, of course, the famous Barbizon Hotel, and to the other, a brand of shaving cream, yes. A solitary guard sitting at a graceful little desk informs them that the salesman will be with them shortly. They idly study the chandelier and the portraits in the entryway. The periodicals neatly aligned on a marble-topped side table include the daily racing form. The French salesman arrives. He is 60-ish, bald, small of stature, and a bit round, wearing a dapper gray suit. He has 9 fingers. Interesting. He is cheerful and shows them into a small office. They chat about the Long Island Railroad and Manhattan's landmark preservation laws. The salesman says that for 50 years, the gallery has tried to shed its image of stuffiness. Finally, he says, "Let's go upstairs. I have some $10 million paintings I want to show you." He mentions the cost, not the quality. Tacky. He is jesting. One of the visitors, in a similar vein, taps his jacket breast. Okay, it's a joke, that's all right. And says, "Well, I brought my checkbook." He has brought his checkbook. The salesman becomes serious. "You should never, never do that," he says. They take a wood-paneled elevator with a 10-foot ceiling to the 3rd floor. The viewing room is among the strangest places the visitors have ever seen. It is dark and large. The floor is covered in dark red wall-to-wall carpet. Dark red curtains hang before the windows, and the walls are completely covered in dark red velvet. 4 Louis XIV chairs, covered in the same velvet, face 2 stands that have been placed against a wall illuminated by small spotlights. The stands are completely covered in dark red velvet too. The room is like an enormous red cufflink box. The salesman, well, that sounds lovely. I'm sure it's beautiful, but wouldn't the light reflect red onto the paintings? Wouldn't that cast them in a, reddish glow, reddish, orangish, pinkish, depending on the quality of the red, right? Would it make them look, wouldn't you want to see them in a more natural light, or a more, a light that would not distort the natural color of the painting? I don't know. That would be my thought, but anyway. How do I know how the painting will look on my wall at home if I don't see it not in red? It could look very different. What if I have blue walls? What if I have cream-colored walls? What then? Anyway, you have to think about these things when you're decorating. Okay, continuing. The salesman takes the names and addresses of his visitors. I would have thought they would have done that already, saying the gallery will keep a record of everything they see. Such meticulousness seems so very Germanic. Stock boys in suits bring in paintings and drawings and rest them on the velvet stands. Movie of the Week in the chat says, daylight is always best, especially for impressionists, but if the lights are shining directly on the painting, you can get around the red cast. Okay, that's fine, Movie of the Week, but I still stand by what I say, that an entirely red room would not be able to show you how best your painting would look in your room if it were not a red room, even if the light weren't an issue. It's a context thing. And it works with anything, not just paintings, any kind of decoration. It would work with a sofa too. So, but I appreciate your information. And I imagine that they could have, a room set up with special lighting so that if it were a cloudy day, you could say, actually, I would think that would be the best way to see something, with variable light. And you would go, oh, this is what it would look like in broad daylight. Boom. This is what it would look like on a cloudy day. Boom. It's like that thing when you go on paint websites where they sell paint and they have those things that say, oh, this is what the paint will look like as the light changes throughout the day. And they're never accurate, but whatever. It's a nice little thing, I guess, for people to play with. Okay, continuing. Stock boys in suits. Okay, I said that. Bring in paintings and drawings and rest them on the velvet stands. A little astonishingly beautiful oil study by Rousseau is $250,000. It's very lovely, the salesman says, but I wouldn't sell it to you. You don't marry a girl on the first date. He offers to show them a Corot priced at $3.5 million. Who knows? In 10 years I'll be gone, but you may want to buy it from us. He runs out several times in response to the beeper on his belt. Just like a dealer. After the long presentation, the salesman asks, astonishingly, do you have time? I'd like to show you the 4th and 5th floors. Oh, yes, please. He leads the visitors through elegant rooms hung with Millet drawings, a drawing by Fragonard, old master drawings, a tiny Pissarro. On the 5th floor, where there are offices, the salesman takes them into a small mirrored room whose shelves are filled with 18th century terracotta figures. 2 hours after their arrival, the visitors prepare to leave. In response to a question, the salesman explains that the only living artist the Wildensteins favor is an Argentine woman who paints horses. When asked if he likes horses, the salesman says, before I answer that, Do you know Danielle Wildenstein? All right, so thus concludes the 1991 Spy magazine article about the Wildensteins, which apparently was the first, major article, or possibly the first article at all, to mention this little problem that the family had with art that they apparently got from the Nazis. So that was the first of the two articles that were mentioned in this Vanity Fair article that we read at the top of the stream. Bitter Spoils from March 1998 issue of Vanity Fair magazine. Now, the second article, and since we are over 3 hours at this point in the stream, I think we can get through this fairly quickly. There is going to be some repetitive information. Obviously, we've heard it before, but there are some little new tidbits, and it is an interesting article to check out, because this was the article that was published in the New York Times the day that Alec Wildenstein Sr. was released from prison after being arrested for pointing a weapon at his wife Jocelyne, who had walked into the Manhattan townhouse to find him wearing nothing but a towel with an unclothed young lady in the bedroom with him. And so that is the incident that broke open the can of worms of Jocelyne's face. Jocelyne, who would have looked a little bit more like this at this point in our story, the sort of 1990s, 2000-ish era Jocelyne, and also really brought out the Nazi loot allegations. So here we go. This is from 3 September 1997, the New York Times. Staking a claim to art the Nazis looted, collector's family tries to illuminate the past of manuscripts in France. Pardon me. In late October 1940, as Hitler's Germany began picking the fruits of its occupation of France, Nazi troops raided Alphonse Kahn's mansion at Saint-Germain-en-Laye near Paris and carried away his entire art collection. The works, which included 8 rare illuminated manuscripts, along with a trove of paintings, drawings, and sculptures, were taken to the Jeu de Paume Museum in Paris, where they were stored pending shipment to Germany. Kahn, 70 at the time and exiled in London, escaped the fate of 76,000 other Jews who were later deported from France to Nazi death camps. But his collection, along with those of the Rothschilds, Rosenbergs, David Weiss, Wildensteins, and other wealthy Jewish families, disappeared. Only after the Allied victory in 1945 were many looted artworks recovered and returned to their owners or their heirs. Kahn, though, had a problem. He had left France in 1938 without making an inventory of his vast collection. When it came to reclaiming missing works, his memory often failed him, and when he died late in 1948 without ever returning to France, his heirs had no alternative source of information. His legacy, shared among 5 nephews, was considerable, but it did not include the 8 medieval manuscripts. Last fall, almost half a century later, Kahn's heirs came upon strong evidence that the fragile prayer books should have formed part of the inheritance. Then, in November, they discovered that the manuscripts were in New York City. New York City! In the possession of Wildenstein and Company, the powerful family-run art dealer, which owns the Wildenstein Gallery at 19 East 64th Street, and the Pace Wildenstein Gallery at 32 East 57th Street, as well as the Wildenstein Foundation in Paris. How the manuscripts arrived in New York, how they were traced, how they were offered for sale after the Kahn estate tracked them down, and how the Wildensteins continue to claim legitimate ownership of the documents, make up a complex new chapter in the extraordinary story of the diaspora of Nazi-confiscated art that began in France in 1940 and continues to this day. It is a story that could easily have been forgotten. After the war, France recovered some 61,000 artworks from Germany, of which 45,000 were identified and returned to their owners. Of the balance, 14,000 of minimal worth were sold, but the government held on to at least 2,000 works. In theory, they were waiting to be claimed. In practice, they were absorbed by French museums, albeit still identified as MNR, the French initials, or MNR, the French initials for National Museums of Recuperation. In the spring of 1996, an American journalist, Hector Feliciano, published Le Musée Disparu, published in the United States this year by Basic Books as The Lost Museum, in which, among other things, he accused successive French governments of making no effort to find the rightful owners of unclaimed works of art. To prove his point, he identified the original owners of several paintings seized by the Nazis that were hanging in French museums. Among readers of the book in France was Francis Varin, 67, a great-nephew of Kahn. He learned that one painting held by the Georges Pompidou Center, Landscape, by the Cubist artist Albert Glaise, belonged to the Kahn collection, and that another in the Fine Arts Museum in Rennes, Picasso's Head of a Woman, 1921, was bought by Kahn in 1924. When I read the book, I called Feliciano, Mr. Varin recalled in an interview. Everything that has happened since then was thanks to him. Mr. Feliciano told him that each of the 12,002 works of art seized from Mr. Kahn's home was marked by the Nazis at the Jeu de Paume with the initials KA for Kahn, Alphonse, and a number. German art experts then recorded a detailed description of each object according to its KA number. To this day, the best instruments we have for finding missing works are the German inventories of more than 50 years ago, said Mr. Feliciano, who used these files while researching his book. We know that every work marked KA was confiscated from Kahn. The problem is that these lists did not arrive until the 1950s, and even then they were kept fairly secret. While Le Musée Disparu drew Mr. Feliciano into a heated public debate with the French authorities, who denied negligence but then organized public exhibitions of unclaimed artworks last spring, Mr. Varin obtained the Kahn dossier from the French Foreign Ministry, the official custodian of unclaimed artworks. Reading it, he and Mr. Feliciano noted that among a large number of missing objects mentioned in the German inventory were 8 illuminated manuscripts, identified as KA879 through 886, 5 late 15th century and early 16th century Flemish books of hours, 2 16th century Italian prayer books, and 1 Persian manuscript. Mr. Varin said that François Avril, curator of manuscripts at the National Library, disclosed that 3 of these unclaimed manuscripts had been exhibited there in 1949, and that while Georges Wildenstein claimed these documents at the time, a report by the National Library had questioned whether he had proven ownership. The Foreign Ministry told me that at least 3 were given at its insistence to the Wildenstein family in 1952, Mr. Varin said. Claims made and dismissed. Georges Wildenstein died at 71 in 1963, but Wildenstein and Company and the Wildenstein Foundation are still run by his son, Daniel, 79, and his grandsons, Guy and Alec. Last November, acting on behalf of the Kahn family heirs, Mr. Varin wrote to the Wildenstein Foundation in Paris, claiming 2 of the manuscripts. In December, he wrote claiming 2 more. In January, he wrote claiming all 8. The Wildensteins dismissed the claims. Replying to the first letter, Guy Wildenstein said his grandfather Georges bought a collection of medieval manuscripts, including those mentioned by Mr. Varin from Alphonse Kahn, before the Second World War. These manuscripts, he said, were stolen by the Germans from the Wildenstein Gallery at 57 Rue de la Boétie and returned to the family after the war. The response to Mr. Varin's other letters came from the Wildenstein Foundation's Paris lawyer, Jean-Luc A. Chartier, who stated that 3 of the manuscripts were bought from Edouard Kahn, a distant cousin of Alphonse Kahn, in 1909. These documents are the exclusive property of the Wildenstein family and were returned to them after being looted, the letter said. At this point, the case threatened to become bogged down in a legal quagmire. What Mr. Varin did not know was that, having sat on the precious manuscripts for 45 years, the Wildensteins suddenly put them on the market. In February, Sam Fogg, a London dealer in rare books, was shown the documents and asked James H. Marrow, a professor of art history at Princeton University, to examine them. During his first visit to the East 64th Street Gallery on March 7, Mr. Marrow said he was introduced to Danielle Wildenstein, who knew the purpose of my visit. During this and a second visit 1 week later, he prepared a detailed description of the manuscript of most interest to the London dealer, an immensely valuable late 15th century document known as the Hours of Jean Carpentin, by an anonymous artist known as the Master of the Dresden Prayer Book. He also inspected the others and was allowed to take color slides of the manuscripts. When he inquired about the provenance, however, Mr. Marrow said he was told they came from the Kahn collection and had been in the possession of the Wildensteins for a very long time, although the family was unable to provide any date, bill of sale, or detail of the acquisition. I never got a straight answer, Mr. Marrow recalled. He said he was also puzzled to find KA plus 3-digit numbers marked in reddish pencil on each of the manuscripts. The Hours of Jean Carpentin, for example, was KA883. In his report to Mr. Fogg, Mr. Marrow praised the manuscripts, but noted the gallery's reluctance to discuss the provenance. He said that the London dealer was evidently interested in the documents, but 1 month later, having agreed on a purchase price, Mr. Fogg abruptly withdrew his offer. Wildenstein could not come up with proof of title and refused to include a clause in the sale contract to indemnify Mr. Fogg in case of claims made about their legitimate ownership, Mr. Marrow said. As he stated to me, this indicated to him that the title of the manuscripts was suspect. Disturbed by the case, I should not scroll and read at the same time. Mr. Marrow consulted a fellow expert in medieval illuminated manuscripts, Bodo Brinkmann, what a great name, curator at the Städel Museum in Frankfurt. Among other evidence, Mr. Brinkmann found the property cards of all 8 documents, with their KA numbers, prepared at the United States Forces Central Collection Point for looted art in Munich. The cards identified the Kahn collection as the presumed owners, and noted the manuscripts arrived at the collection point on July 16, 1946, and left for Paris on October 30, 1946. Opening the door to a solution. In May, Mr. Marrow got in touch with Mr. Varin and shared all his information with him. I told him, "I'm not a judge or a lawyer," Mr. Marrow recalled. "I'm just saying that there are documents stolen from the Kahn collection, and someone else is offering them for sale. This is as close as one can get to an open and shut case. Since then, while preparing a lawsuit to recover the disputed manuscripts, Mr. Varens said he had tried to leave open the door for the Wildensteins to recognize their mistake, very generous of him, and return the documents. I am sure that when they see the proof, Mr. Varens said, they will want to return them. And this is all to their credit. Yes, indeed. Very well put. In a telephone interview on Monday, however, Daniel Wildenstein described the claims as a joke, although he offered a somewhat different version of events from that presented by his son Guy and his lawyer. He said the documents were bought by his grandfather Nathan from Edouard Khan between 1903 and 1914, and that he had records to prove this. He added that they were taken by the Germans from a safe in the Bank of France and duly returned to the family after the war. He dismissed the KA markings on the documents as having no significance. I can't understand the claim, he said. It's an absolutely crazy thing, 100 years after an object was bought, to come with a claim without any paper whatsoever. They claim it 50 years later? They had no claim for 50 years? I tell you something. If tomorrow someone steals a picture from me, I make a declaration to the police that it's stolen. After 30 years, the man who stole it owns it. Again, invoking the finders keepers rule, which I don't think is legal anywhere. And Movie of the Week in the chat says, art dealers, more like art thieves. Well, some people call them money launderers, Movie of the Week, so I don't know what is worse, to be called a thief or a launderer. I guess it's about 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Well, continuing with this article, our final article, and we are almost at the end of it. They were always on sale. Asked why the documents had suddenly been offered for sale, Mr. Wildenstein said it was a coincidence resulting from Mr. Fogg's interest in manuscripts. They were always on sale, but we're not in the business of manuscripts. Anyway, they're very bad manuscripts. Only one is worth something. Well, then why are you so keen to hang on to them? If they're so lousy, why wouldn't you just give them back, if anything, as an act of charity? Excuse me. Continuing. And as for Mr. Varens' threat to go to court, he said, they can go to court as much as they want. The unspoken part. We have more money than God, and we can outspend them. Right. But did that happen? Well, we will find out on a future stream. Okay, continuing. Mr. Marrow, who has offered to testify in the case, said he found this the most troubling case of this kind he has known. I find this offends me more, partly because I am Jewish, he said. For this to happen in war is one thing, but for anyone to try to profit now is almost like doing it again, doubling the crime, trafficking in material taken by Germans. Now, I don't think you have to be Jewish to be offended by this behavior. It's awful. And I think it's just as bad in war. If you're I don't know if it gets any better or worse if it's during the war. I mean, if your neighbors got arrested during the war and you ran into their house and stole their stuff, that's really incredibly, well, there's a word I want to use, but it's not for general population. It's a terrible, horrible, awful thing. I don't think doing it not at a time of war makes it better. It might be worse during the war, actually, but I guess he's giving them points for opportunism in wartime. I don't know. I don't know about that. Don't know that I agree. Excuse me. For Mr. Feliciano, who has been investigating this case closely, it is simply a telling example of a broader phenomenon. This case, in a nutshell, shows why 50 years later, we're still fighting to recover art stolen by the Nazis, he said. Plundered art is like the Loch Ness Monster. Everyone talks about it for a while, then forgets about it until the next sighting. Well, it's a good thing he didn't say plundered art is like the Loch Ness Monster, proven to be a hoax after all these years. No, plundered art is very, very, very real, unlike the Loch Ness Monster, to my great disappointment. Really, really wanted a monster floating around in a Scottish lake, but oh well, it was not to be. But now we have come to the end of our stream. This has been part 2 of Jocelyne Wildenstein, Remembering the Catwoman. We are going to be continuing this series on Jocelyne and the Wildenstein family. We will be doing future installments on Jocelyne herself, her life, for a woman who at the moment, as we are plowing through the stack of media that has been written about the Wildensteins, we are only up to the late 1990s. At this point in time in history, Alec and Jocelyne have not yet been divorced, so we have yet to come to the conclusion of their divorce, their settlement. At what happens to Jocelyne after that? She was rumored to have received $2.5 billion, as much as $2.5 billion in a divorce settlement. But then she ended up declaring bankruptcy and having money troubles. She had to auction off her fantastic animal-inspired jewelry collection. Why? We will find out on future streams. And we will follow the life and fortunes of Alec Wildenstein Sr., his brother Guy, and their children. David Wildenstein, Guy's son, is continuing the family fortunes, and he's out and about, and he's actually given an interview fairly recently. The Wildensteins do not give many interviews, Jocelyne being an exception. But we will meet David and his wife, who is also a nepobaby, part of a dynasty of her own. And we'll meet Jocelyne's paramour, the man who shared the last years of her life with her, Lloyd Klein, a fashion designer, interesting man on his own. They had a tumultuous relationship, but they stayed together through thick and thin, until we lost Jocelyne just at the very last day of last year, 2024. This lovely lady, and I don't mean that ironically. It was a terrible thing that happened, that she co-created this unfortunate face with her surgeons. But it seems that inside, she had some things going on, and the Wildensteins did not treat her the best. So my sympathies to the lovely. We will remember her in this way. The lovely Jocelyne Wildenstein. And we will come back and talk about her and talk about the other Wildensteins on the next installment, although we do have other topics coming up in the future. So our next installment of the Wildenstein series will be sometime next week, but then we will have some other topics coming up next week as well. So I hope to see you there, whether you join us live or on the playback. This has been Friendship Empire. I am the Empress, and please hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and I hope you have a very, very good day. Thank you for joining us, and bye.